bullshit. 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 It's bullshit. It's bullshit. Bullshit. It's bullshit. 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 I'm talking about the bullshit. Bullshit. Talking about the bullshit. Bullshit. Talking about the bullshit. 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 Bullshit.
This is like one of those things where you know when you say a word to the point of it just losing all like tangible meaning.
Of course.
Yeah.
Bullshit. 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 Bullshit.
Oh, these are kicking in.
Bullshit. 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 Thing about music. I wasn't going to give away the acronym forever, but I suppose there you go, guys. Anyway, welcome to the show today. This is Mandala, and I'd like to welcome you all to this fine series of albums we've got here today. It was 808 States, Dr. Lowfruit, 4 a.m. mix. There's a bit of confusion over what's actually being said in the song, though. Pretty sure that
the lyrics are not "Our lips are sealed," it's "Alex the Seal."
Ah, point. I never thought about that before. I feel like a dummy. Now, anyway, I suppose, well, actually, I had a vague theme going through the albums that I picked today, but as is the cycle, actually, you'll be going first today.
Yeah,
So,
nice.
I suppose, I don't know if is there any further ado that must be attended to?
No, I guess we'll get into your vague theme just as your first pick starts.
Yeah, I think that would be better.
I didn't have a vague theme, but I realized as I was constructing the list that 3 of the titles had the word dead in it, and so I just rearranged the order to have them play out at the end. I was like, that's kind of neat, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Just by circumstance.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
But one that doesn't have dead in it is my first pick here, which is Certain Ratio Sextet.
Yeah, someone must have left it underneath the car.
Oh, man, I was gonna say that. I knew you would steal it.
No, I remember like yesterday I was thinking of, I thought of like, oh, I'll introduce it by that, but I completely forgot about it, and then I tried to kind of wedge it in there.
It was inevitable.
Wedge Antilles it in there.
It was inevitable. An early example, I guess, of a band naming themselves after a lyric like that, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess full disclosure, apparently this is not, the same song is not where the Modern Lovers got their name from.
Yeah, that's, I guess, just a bit of folklore or something. I don't know how that got around.
I've never read that anywhere. We just like to playfully assume it back in the day, I remember. But I've never read of that actually being the case.
Yeah, I don't think it is, because I think the Modern Lovers are around before that song.
Yeah, though that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah,
but obviously a Certain Ratio have our own record as saying, and where else would you get a name like a Certain Ratio? From the song The True Real from Brian Eno off of Taking Tiger Mountain.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas a Certain Ratio are clearly inspired by Eno, it's about, what do they start up a few years later? I think their first album's like 78, 79.
Yeah, that's early for one of these post-punk acts.
Yeah, and I didn't realise till recently, actually, that they were another one of the Factory Records groups, and then like Martin Hannett produced, I think their albums up to this one.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess with this one they decided to go with a different producer, which, you know what, I do like most of the albums Martin Hannett produces, but he has a very like peculiar and particular production, which I could only describe as like biting into a waffle in an aquarium. Like it's thin and it sounds underwater, but he like will have a way of like, say with the Joy Division ones, like the guitar lines will just come right through the middle of the mix, and like it hits you. Whereas this one is like the production is definitely suits, like, I don't know if you've heard other Certain Ratio albums.
Not necessarily.
But the Martin Hannett produced ones, I don't know, the sound just doesn't quite work for this group. And you can probably hear why, right? Because this one's got a very, very full production. Like, it sounds like a jazz fusion, sort of on the softer side production, like a Steely Dan funky, or who I was going to say, this album on first impression, it's like, a funny thing I thought of was, It's like Susie Sue's playing with the Slits, and it's being produced by a Weather Report.
Oh, interesting. Joe's always on the gang.
It's got that kind of Weather Report sound to it, I think.
Yeah.
The production.
Yeah, especially about that Jacko period of that really loud bass, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I think the bassist must have been inspired by Mr. Pistorius.
Yeah, I was thinking of Bootsy Collins here, just that very loud...
Yeah, a little Bootsy too.
Kind of delightfully aggressive sound.
And just those electric keys as well.
Oh, yeah.
Beautiful. And then they... Yeah. But maybe a bit more like jazzy, rather than like, what would you call Bernie Worrell's? Like...
Sparkly.
Psychedelic electronics.
Yeah, it was worth mentioning. They formed a certain ratio in '78. Although the first album, which appears to have been a cassette release, was '79. Yeah. And the first LP. Well, no, sorry, I think this is probably released on vinyl. 2 each, 1981, and Sextet 1981.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's funny. Martin Hannett's like really upbeat bass sound. The sound of Bummed is one of my favorite things in this world, but that's sort of like a slacker funk, so I think it suited that.
No, it's definitely, I was gonna bring that up as a comparison, actually, so I'm glad you did. That sort of Martin Hannett sound does suit the Mondays a little bit better, though the 81 album's not too bad, but this one just like knocks me on my ass.
Great punch.
It's very punchy, and it's just like another one of these sort of like mutant disco post-punk records, but it's got a bit more going for it as well. Like sometimes that sound can be a bit samey when you like it's better for singles, whereas this really like carries it all the way through. It has like an atmosphere to it in between all those like staccato guitar bits and the trottling like bass. The pretty standard mutant disco like post-punky sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And so it'll bridge those moments with all these sort of like sort of down-tempo-y, jazz fusion-y sort of things. And I just like you said as well, the bass is like addictive. The first track on the album, Lucinda, which apparently was played in like punk clubs and stuff, funnily enough. It's got that similar to remember that Kiwi record? The car crash set, where it had those like similar funky groove songs. You notice that groove, I swear, because it's also in like a few city pop songs and a few like American R&B tracks from the time. Correct me if I'm wrong, but does it not sound like the bass from Mario 1-2? The World 1-2.
Oh, the Underground World.
Yeah,
Sure.
All of that, like Midnight Driver has it too. Bum 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 bum.
Yeah, of course. I love that song.
All these like jazz fusiony funk songs, I swear that bass line is like, and variations of it are used all the time. And for such a common bass line, I always get behind it. Maybe because it just reminds me of the original Super Mario Brothers.
Formative track.
I mean, I'm sure Koji Kondo listened to plenty of that sort of stuff, like jazz fusion funk.
Yeah.
It would not surprise me. But as well, another reason why I wanted to talk about this album today, because like in my arrogance of wanting to be the world's first baggy historian, I realized I couldn't. Like in a way, this album I realized is like almost a genesis of that sound. Like there's a song on it called Day One, which has that like wah-wah guitar mixed in with a similar sort of funk bass. And I'm like, oh wow, Fool's Gold by the Stone Roses didn't just come out of nowhere,
Interesting.
I think you can quite easily draw the lineage as well, given that I realize it was a Factory Records band,
Oh, yes.
So from Manchester, or at least based in Manchester. I'm not sure where they're from, to be honest. And, maybe the Stone Roses saw them playing Day One at some point.
They're a Manchester band.
Okay, yeah. So I realized it sounded quite like that baggy sort of funk Mondays sort of thing. It had been building up for a while, or maybe just like these guys were really the sort of progenitors of it. They're almost like the proto baggy act.
Nice.
So I don't know. It's just a fun album, interesting music, pioneering in a weird way, even by doing like. Well, I guess baggy was sort of retro stylings, like 70s wah-wah guitars, stuff like that, but done in a sort of the very CD era, sort of fresh way.
Absolutely, yeah.
And this feels more like that than like a retro 70s thing,
Yeah.
Even though the sounds for 1982 might be a bit old, the overall way it's mixed and utilized is just so unique, and you can hear where that northern funk sound came from eventually,
I think they make that funk sound seem kind of punk here.
They weren't the only groups to do this. Plenty in New York, other than maybe a dozen or so New York groups that did this around this time period. One of my favorites being Material on One Down, which came out I think the same year. Beautiful album.
That's a good comparison.
Yeah, that's actually got an early before she was a commercial smash hit. Whitney Houston.
Oh yes,
one of the tracks, and it's very beautiful.
Yeah.
That's why they snatched her up for the corporate world.
Yeah, because that is a very slow ballad. That's like the ballad song in the album.
Yes, yeah.
You can hear where definitely they were like, all right,
money to be made.
Scouted her off Material. That's nuts. Actually,
make generic crap. And ruin her life basically. It's horrible. As the music industry for
they
everyone.
exploit artists, yeah. Especially they exploit vulnerable artists, people they know are vulnerable like that, you know.
Anyway, on a lighter note, a certain ratio sextet. It's sextet. That's the kind of the name of a jazz album, right? You get like someone on Herbie Hancock's record. Oh, that is what Herbie Hancock's record sextet.
Well, a sextet is I forget however many numbers, but it's a certain amount of numbers, isn't it?
I hope to know this.
Six.
Of course.
Six. Okay.
I was going to guess that, but I was scared it would be wrong.
So I assume they called it that because there were 6 in the band.
Presumably, yeah. And
but like you said, it's right in the middle of the post-punk era. They got an album that would have a jazz album name on it. Yeah,
it's kind of punk on its own.
Sure,
a little bit. But
the first acid jazz album.
But what we've got is there's a certain punk approach to them playing sort of jazz or funky styles, which resembles sort of certain free jazz moments, and they are virtuosic enough that they can make it work. You know what I mean? It's not like it just falls into the sort of
No, these guys are really virtuosic, actually.
Yeah.
For the punk scene. Yeah,
I was gonna say, it doesn't just fall into, not that I dislike this whatsoever, the sort of crazy manic freakouts of the pop group or even Bauhaus at times.
Yeah, no, it's not that. It's not like dissonant funk. It's
not that those guys couldn't play, especially the Bauhaus guys. They can play.
Sure.
But they were doing something more chaotic and less jazzy and formal. Not that this is. I mean, free jazz is a sort of there's a respect for formalism in there that requires a certain degree of discipline before you go out.
Yeah, technical ability.
You can listen to Sam Rivers talk about this in an interview, and he's as free jazz cred as you get, you know. But anyway, sextet, a certain ratio, really, really good. It's amazing how the post-punk world. This is great artifact of how, if you wanted to demonstrate to people what did it mean to punk rock, this thing which occurs with bands like Sex Pistols, Clash and the Damned over in the UK, and it's like, let's kind of strip it all back and just like punchy music for what it is. Forget this big pompous, bulbous stuff. How about like, why can't we, the Beatles are just a bunch of lads from Liverpool, why can't we do what they did? Like, why did this barrier be constructed after they innovated? And it was a great question, actually. And so all these groups decided that, why can't we just sort of... They had great respect. They had great artistic convictions, as serious as those massive artists. Maybe even more serious, because they weren't thinking about money. They were just thinking about making really interesting art to potentially change the world. But they were quite serious about changing the world at that time in the late 70s and early 80s. It was a time of great strife in the UK. Like, the only obvious thing to do was to try and change the world. If people from the time talk about what a tough situation.
Yeah, no, that's a good description of the time, seemingly. Yeah,
and then you have these groups. Obviously in prog rock, you had all these groups in massive studios just throwing everything at the wall, and they're like, "Oh, we've got all our technical virtuosity. We've got this expensive production, in recording these houses, and we have all this pretensions and wanting to be these guru figures, John Anderson or Peter Gabriel. Or,
sort of larger than life
archetypes,
guys.
Yeah, this sort
Whereas
of
the punks
figures.
wanted to be you can be us.
Blokes. I remember there's a quote from, I think it's Holly Johnson from Frank Goes to Hollywood, said the big difference around that era was Paul McCartney, he was disappeared from Liverpool, but Ian McCulloch, you could still see him on the bus, and you'd be like, oh hey.
Yeah, that's funny actually. Yeah, totally.
Like Liverpool bands go, which Frankie were one of them, and so they were bands like the pop group said, well, we don't have to. Why should we have a big? We don't need to have the expensive Virgin Records funding of Henry Cowell. We can do this too.
Sure,
we're just in Bristol. You know what I mean? Or Bauhaus or This Heat. He descended from a Phil Manzanera act. Charles Haywood had Quiet Son. He's thinking, do I need this big expensive funding to do this? No, I can do it here. Who says I can't? And or Joy Division making some of the most godlike frightening cosmic krautrock music. It's like, who says we need Visconti in the most expensive studios in Berlin to do what Bowie did?
Yeah.
And Bill and Eno did in that amazing, in Iggy Pop, in that amazing series of albums there.
Sure,
and
sure.
So, and a certain ratio, similarly, who says we need Herbie Hancock's funding to do something like that?
Yeah.
And sort of more punk, sort of, but by punk, I mean, like, context that's relevant to them. These guys aren't trying to be American, like, kind of sort of like seasoned jazz musicians. They're trying to be like, you know, British punk club musicians. But they're playing that sort of form. We can do anything within that context.
And they got to the jazz fusion probably because they were fans, and they were probably thinking, what new can we bring to punk? And that's what they brought. And it was fresh.
They probably enjoyed both styles of music, and they didn't see it as inconsistent. They said, well, here's why we enjoy both. You know, there's no reason that these two can't be seen as part of the same sort of, I don't know what, anti-rockers tract.
No, that's true. I didn't think about that. This is like a very seamless genre fusion album. Yeah, they managed to mix the two together in such a way that, A
lot of the punks are quite shameless about enjoying a lot of dance music, as long as it wasn't, you know, rock, Leonard Skinner and Zeppelin, and things like that.
Sure.
Interestingly enough. Or, you know, Jefferson Airplane or Grateful Dead or The Doors, you know. They'd rather talk about Donna Summer or you know, well, even obviously Frankie Goes to Hollywood began as punks, but like, you know, that sort of new wave sort of
Kraftwerk.
And even like the punks would sooner praise Stock Aitken Waterman than the likes of Jerry Garcia, you know what I mean?
Maybe.
Maybe I'm pushing it with Stock Aitken Waterman.
But I get your point.
The hatred about that Rolling Stone magazine sort of world like is pivotal in the punk understanding of how a lot of the punks, at least in a UK context, perceived recent history, let's say. To them, their recent history, I have to clarify. But no, this is really good. I was happy to spend more time with this group because I've been... I've always been on my radar, but I just never really took a deeper dive into them. And
they're one of those bands. Yeah. I think they're like that for quite a lot of people, seemingly.
They're
like that for me for a long time.
Interesting, hey. Yeah. And with that all being said, is it worth maybe now moving on to the next release here?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've actually featured this artist prior on Mandala. And Mike, M-I-K...
What was the previous album called again?
The previous album was called May God Bless Your Hustle. That's from 2017.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Mike, born Michael Jordan Bonema, he is a young man, 2 years younger than myself, and he's already... put out some of the most interesting, I think, well, to me, like, sonically captivating hip-hop albums of the 21st century. I was showering May God Bless Your Hustle with praise as, like, a really terrific example of, like, a lot of mainstream expensive hip-hop had kind of gone the way of, like, 80s rockist albums. Like, I make a point of comparison between, like, I don't know, like, in the 2010s, a lot of the major mainstream stuff by artists such as... let's say, well, Kendrick Lamar's the obvious example, frankly. I'm not the biggest... I don't know, there are releases I find a lot more interesting than Good Kid, M.A.A.D.C.D. and To Pimp a Butterfly. And I gotta say the same thing about Danny Brown. Even though I think this stuff is good, Freddie Gibbs and Madlib, the Def Grips albums that came out after The Money Store, I felt this way about Travis Scott. Never really got Travis Scott, to be honest. And this is before, you know, I'm not just saying that because of the manslaughter. This is long before that happened. Even though I think the Pusha T album, Daytona's good, I don't think it's... I seemingly don't think it's as quite as amazing as a lot of other people seem to. Never got JPEG Mafia, at least not yet. Maybe he'll put out something. Never got Playboy Cardi. That being said, of course, the 2010s also had, even though I wasn't that hot on Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, which could fall into that former category of like sort of just wrought.
Well, that's a rockist album. I mean, Elton John's on it.
Point, I guess. But, you know, The Life of Pablo and Ye, I thought were cool. And Mac Homie's like sort of half-half. I mean, he's not trying to impress anyone, to be fair. And like the only people who seem to know about him are sort of sort of people who are really into like the music rating world online. And of course, by the end of the decade, you had like Billy Woods hopping up, Kenny Siegel, that Hiding Places album. And Billy Woods had an album earlier in the decade, but he became a lot more prolific around the turn of the 2010s to the 20s. And of course, Injury Reserve's first album pointed to like a really interesting direction, which I'll talk about more in a moment. And the Run the Jewel stuff in the 2010s was great. And of course, Little Ugly Mane. The point is, there was good stuff in the 2010s, but it's more of this underground vein, and that's where Mike's, or sort of DIY vein, and Mike sort of fitting into that category too.
Yeah,
the artists I mentioned who were a bit less interesting to me. Maybe some of them fall into DIY. Maybe JPEG Mafia is a little more DIY than I realised.
Like, you know, I guess
I don't know. It sounds too much like wanted to be mainstream to me.
Yeah, and the distinction between those artists you mentioned and the more underground acts of the 2010s, it would have been like people that were downstream of like cloud rap and SoundCloud rap and stuff like that, you know.
Yeah.
Which was more DIY, which is what like Mike feels sort of not indebted to, but inspired by.
Yes, for sure.
Like there's one of the earlier tracks on this album as well. I was listening to it with headphones, and the way it was mixed and cut and pasted, it sounded more like a plunderphonic sort of experiment.
Oh,
you know? In the vaporwave sort of sense, like an Echo Jams type thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like an Echo Jams rap song. I was like, yeah, this is neat. And yeah, there's that consistent sort of glitchy cut and paste, and also like looped jazz and like jazz fusion in like a Weather Report vein, you know, which is very vaporwave as well. Yeah, there's a real sort of like his production it's like it's like plunderphonic, but without any of the stitching, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a good way of smoothing over the seams. It's like a very seamless sort of collage-y experience, you know.
Yeah.
Like in an earlier episode, you're probably mentioning what you wish like Animal Collective could be in regards to like Magdalena Bay,
of course,
like now, and that's sort of what this vaporwavy glitch stuff in and out of hip hop. But there's some of it in hip hop, and like you said, it's from the more underground realm than you know, say people like Kendrick and Pusha T and all those artists you mentioned, you know. And I just think it's because maybe like that is the more DIY sort of thing, because you got to use like midis and samples, and you know, you don't have big studios and things like that. It's just mostly done in home studios with sample machines, drum machines, and maybe some synthesizers and stuff like that. And so they try to push that as like it's like a collage in a way. And I do like this guy's laid back audible mumble flow as well. It's like, remember when I was talking about the EPMD album, that rapper, he's got that same sort of drawl, and I do like that style, like the sort of, it's like a J Mascis drawl done in like a hip hop sort of style, you know. And I don't know, it's a nice sonic. I think it works really well, especially in like sort of vaguely emotional stuff like this album gets, you know. Yeah, the feeling I got when this album started up was eerie. Do you ever get the feeling when you listen to something for the first time of deja vu, like you've heard it before? Maybe that's because I listened to the previous Mike album, but I was like, man.
Well, I played this in here at one point. Remember that I played this 5 of them?
Yeah, but that was more just ambience. I wasn't even really
sure.
paying attention.
Okay, fair
anything.
enough then. Yeah.
It's more the case of just like, you listen to something for the first time, and it's like, you have a sort of intimacy with it. You feel like, you've heard it before. In that deja vu sense, it's a feeling, not like a recognition or anything. Yeah. And I was wondering why that is sometimes with music. Maybe it's because of sort of like backwards flow of time where you like it so much, like some like point in the future, yet all that feeling's rushing back as you first listen to it.
Yeah.
I was like, maybe if that was the case, that would be cool. So this album was weirdly metaphysical, and the last track was great as well. That was probably, I was like, the second that ended, I was just like, man, killer experience.
It's probably worth mentioning, Mike doesn't seem to be credited as producer, at least on the RYM here.
Okay.
DJ Black Power and the other two credited producers are Gaud, G-A-U-D, and Laron.
Nice. Well, they do a good bloody job.
Yeah. It's worth mentioning that, you know, but those artists that I was sort of praising more so from the 2010s, like, why I really seem more excited about the hip-hop at least as a recorded music genre in this decade, is because those artists seem to have more of a dominion over at least the more now popularly acclaimed acts on the internet in the genre. And the problem I have with the kind of why I was calling them rockers to those sort of hip hop artists / albums in the 2010s I wasn't so hot on is it reminds me of that moment in the 80s where like a lot of rock acts are sort of composing these big sort of arrogant pieces with sort of the magazines in mind to give them that they were going to fulfill the quota of like what you needed to do for a great album.
Yeah.
And sort of they feel so contrived and sort of didactic and forced. And the big examples are in the 80s rock era. The Police's Synchronicity, U2's The Joshua Tree, and even though it was ironically intended as a parody of them, it still kind of fell into the category, The Cure's Disintegration.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure there are more examples, but those sort of hip-hop albums I was sort of mentioning in a more slightly negative light, they remind me of those sort of rock albums. And I was wondering, did hip-hop enter that stage last decade? And were the albums I enjoyed more, are they the equivalent of the more underground or alt/post-punk albums I prefer to the more rockist, sort of contrived, highly produced staples that you see topping a lot of the lists in that decade?
Yeah.
For that decade. Because in the 2010s, like some of the stuff coming out is, really exciting. Even some of the more mainstream stuff, which, I'm not obsessed with, but, I still think it's quite good and entertaining. Like, Little Sims is quite fun, I think, actually. And the recent Danger Mouse and Blackfort, and then, of course, Blackfort's own Glorious Game. I mean, that smokes a lot of the 2010 stuff, I would say. Billy Wood's continuing very strong. The Tyler, the Creator album from this decade was the best one. I know people like the ones from the last two from the early 2010s. They're pretty good. The one from the early this decade smokes it. Kendrick's best album also came out in this decade, I would argue. And maybe even Denzel Curry's The Clipping album. I think they both came out. The one came out at the end of last decade, the 2019, and the 2020 Visions of Bodies Being Burned, amazing. The Freddie Gibbs, the Alfredo album from 2020, that's the best of those Freddie Gibbs albums. That I think is better than the ones that came out in the 2010s that he did with Madlib. I listened to that McKinley Dixon album, Beloved Paradise Jazz. I thought it was quite good. And CDs of Gums smokes most of that so-called 2010s classics. Yeah. And the recent Armand Hammer stuff from Shrines Onward is awesome, especially the Shrines album itself, I think. The point I'm making is, like, I think we're in a really exciting era for at least these popularly acclaimed hip-hop acts, and I just feel disappointed because I used to wonder if it was just me in the 2010s, and I kind of... Because I was bemoaning, and it's good you brought up the Animal Collective thing in regard to Magdalena Bay, because I said briefly in the 2010s that this neo-psychedelia seemed to fall out of favour in lieu of... And one of the things I said, and the first thing I said was of political hip-hop, meaning that sort of rockist, boring, like, magazine...
This is America!
Kendrick Lamar, and that... Oh, God, that was a Childish Gambino thing. That's, like, the most ugly encapsulation of it.
The second I heard
people
that
don't quite like it, I imagine.
Probably not anymore, yeah. The second I heard that song, I was just like, this is...
So high school, so privileged.
Any like choreographic dance where people like
rich kid
float around like, ooh, we're disillusioned. It's like any Sia music video. It's just such a hackneyed idea.
Like Sia seems almost unlikely.
So that's true. Hip hop was sort of in that place, especially circa 2016, 17.
I really think so. Yeah, and it was just not very interesting.
And Lil Nas X came in and saved us all.
Why not? But yeah, and I guess this Mike album is an example of this, coming full circle. Obviously, we hinted at, if you would have heard, I didn't at the time, but if you heard his, May God Bless Your Hustle in 2017, you would have had the sense that something in the underground was really brewing that was incredibly interesting. And now these guys not that the productions wasn't superlative then, but even stronger and more precise now, but still kind of creative. Doesn't seem contrived. Feels very organic and unpredictable. I think anyone who has a remote liking for this genre, unless they are too obsessed with, based upon some people I knew who liked certain hip hop when I was a teenager, unless they're too obsessed with this sort of like bizarre suburban Caucasian gangster LARPing, which, I don't even know what I can even say about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's where most of hip-hop record sales have been since the 90s.
Yeah. That's such a situation, isn't it? But, so they might think something like this is a bit too arty, but maybe they would like it. I don't know. I don't know. I can't imagine whether they would be so hostile to a hip hop artist being. Would that be a problem for like one of these people that are hip hop? I would imagine like they would sooner object to like a hip hop that was more like kind of commercial and sort of very. I mean, some of the stuff they listened to was arguably still quite commercial, but like they would object to like Pitbull and things like that, or like really trash mainstream stuff.
Yeah,
like,
the sort of thing you hear.
Like some of them would even say like, "Oh, Eminem's trash" or whatever.
Sure.
He's fake or blah blah blah.
Yeah, especially these days.
Well, yeah, of course.
But yeah, Pitbull or something you hear in like a shopping centre.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because you're not going to hear
like Eminem actually.
Travis Scott in a shopping centre, but he's still huge.
Yeah. Travis Scott's not really. Travis Scott wasn't really popular when I was in high school, so that's not really what I was thinking of so much.
Kendrick.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Any of those ones you mentioned, you're not going to hear their songs.
The amount of cred that Tupac and Biggie still had a lot of cred amongst those people.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
And obviously, like more contemporary stuff to that era, like that was either Australian or like just stuff that like I barely even remember what it was.
Oh, that's right. Does anyone remember Bliss and Esso? If so,
I know. Yeah.
Sure.
I remember Bliss and Esso. That was Australian, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is a very high recommendation from me.
I agree. It's good shit.
Rated as the 12th best album of 2023 on this website, and I gotta say, from what I've heard of the other things here, it's smoking the. There's also that. From what I heard of that, I was never the biggest fan of these guys as it was. Like I just found that stuff a bit, whatever, not very memorable, but. The JPEG Mafia and Danny Brown album is considered the best of 2023, Scaring the Hose. I think this smokes that.
Oh, yeah.
And although the Billy Woods and Kenny Siegel Maps album is good, I would say this is more interesting. That McKinley Dixon album I mentioned before, which is titled Beloved Paradise Jazz, I would say Mike's more interesting. I would say it's more interesting than the Arm & Hammer release, We Buy Diabetic Test Strips. Frankly, I think they've done better than that one, but it's okay. I've only listened to it one time. Maybe I would change my opinion. And of course, also in this top 10 are two albums I do quite like. One is Petrodragonic Apocalypse, although I don't like some of the other ones I mentioned, I just do, but quite a bit, very much. Petrodragonic Apocalypse is in here, we mentioned that before, on the Mandala, King Gizzard, very much a fan of that. And I quite like Jesse Ware's That Feels Good, it's fairly pleasant. Though I like Ana Frango Electrico, the title's in Portuguese, I'm not going to try to remember it here, because I cannot. But of course, the opening track, Electric Fish, is one of the great pop tracks of the 21st century, or at least 2020 thus far. But anyway, waffling on a bit perhaps. Is it worth moving on now?
Waffle! Yeah! I think I said enough about Mike. It's a good album. Give it a listen. Let's go to my next pick. Man, I can't believe that this album is nearly 25 years old.
Yeah.
That's crazy to think about, eh? We got, Modest Mouse, The Moon in Antarctica, from 2000, right?
2000 June.
Yeah. Now, I guess this album I've been like a huge fan of for so long. It may as well just be Oxygen to me now. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's like one of the first like full length albums I kind of really got into as a conceptual piece or whatever. It was sort of like, you know how you hear 70s kids talk about things like Dark Side of the Moon, stuff like that. It was sort of my equivalent to that.
Interesting.
And I think it's a very sort of effective album at doing that. You wouldn't think so from like a sort of like a middle America indie rock band, but it's strange how like this is a very popular band on the internet, obviously. And I guess in a similar sort of vein to, like OK Computer, or like I mentioned in the Built to Spill one.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there are these albums of that era that are sort of like overhyped as these like return to prog sort of rockist sort of albums in a way.
Yeah.
But I think this is one that it wasn't even necessarily going for that outside of like this very particular guy. I think Isaac Brock.
Yeah.
He's like, earn a sort of artful expression, somehow mixes with ambition and finally gets to this sort of like near perfect rock album in a way. Like the first two albums I really like, and they're like very heavily acclaimed from like internet music nerds or whatever. But like as whole albums, I've never really liked them that much. The songs
I don't love them.
The songs, like some of the songs on that album are like some of the best songs I've ever heard. But as a whole album listening sort of thing, they feel a bit disjointed to me in a way.
I like the second one. I think it's fairly good.
A bit more so
first
than
one,
the
the first one sort of just doesn't really grip me personally. Like I don't really have a highly memorable time listening to it necessarily.
Sure.
It's a shame, and honestly,
Yeah, there's, like I said, there's a few sort of fillery tracks on there, and it's probably just a collection of songs that haven't been put together or sequenced in a particular way that fits into like an album or whatever. So it's not the best sort of overall listening. Whereas, and the second one for me is a little bit the same, but by the time you get to this album, I don't know, it's like they perfected something. Whereas like, I can't necessarily, there's only like maybe one or two songs on this album that I could just listen to individually without wanting to go and then listen to the full album. It's very rare for an album from this sort of era to be like that, you know. The CD era is where people could skip songs on their CD player, and now we can just like, you know, create our own playlists and be selectors or whatever as much as you want.
yeah.
Whereas, like, this is one within that like late 90s paradigm where they're long albums, you know, like a concept album that it can be a little over an hour or whatever, but somehow like I just want to listen to the whole thing all the way through as a sort of a piece, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. Like, maybe it's just something to my own sensibilities, because there's a sort of strange existentialism to Isaac Brock's like lyrics and overall just sort of mood more so. It's a sort of like a traveling or like, you know, Bukowski sort of meets you know, the On the Road guy, Kerouac sort of thing, mixed in with that sort of vaguely like 90s emo, like nihilism for like the sort of mall culture.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite side of like the mall rats, or it's even like sort of what mall rats were, you know, the movie, but also the concept of what the movie's about, essentially.
Yeah.
It's sort of the world a band like this is built from. And yeah, like, for something that you'd think would be too American or to be like a transcendent concept, it really does sort of pull through.
Yeah.
In like a very sort of celestial way, hence the name of the album, right? And like I said, it's just got strange existential lyrics. Like, he has an idea about the universe just being a big math equation. And like, probably my favorite song of theirs is the like sort of centerpiece of the album, The Stars Are Projectors. And it's just like this immensely like mystical tale. Like, I guess similar to that first song on that Built to Spill album I talked about, where it's just like this idea of like these cosmic sort of like watchers or something like that sort of push along like a sort of a math equation that is like a predetermined like life, you know. And this idea that people like want to argue against it as if they have some sort of free will. It's like a very existential concept for like an indie rock band, you know, and conveyed in a very sort of like heartfelt, almost troubadour way, I feel. Even for someone that, you know, has a lisp and a kind of bad singing voice, to be able to transcend that as well is something else. I don't know. I'm just a really big fan of the album. I guess I was just listening to it again recently, so I wanted to talk about it.
Yeah.
Because it is one that is upheld as like an indie rock era classic that I think does deserve it. Because I think a few of those are very overhyped. In the way that rockist era albums, I feel, are also overhyped, you know?
Yeah.
It's one and the same. And similar to like certain rockist era albums, I'll bring up one later that actually is a bad comparison because it was sort of rejected, but like a Yes album, you know? And there's like, I love like, say, Close to the Edge, and that's one of these like rockist classics.
Yeah,
so I think of this in a similar vein to like that, you know? It's, yeah, and similar to a few of my later picks as well, it's this idea that this sort of deeply existential rock music didn't end, you know, with punk rock and new wave.
No.
Like, it came back around, and to some degree, maybe even a bit more powerful. You know, you can argue that.
Oh,
but,
yeah, we were championing Audrey some shows ago.
Yeah, exactly, and it's come back again.
But
Yeah,
you thought it was over then, like...
Yeah, no, precisely, yeah.
No, because, like, people, like, that shoegaze sound, like, you know how My Bloody Valentine is that psychedelic wash? Audrey's sort of shoegaze sheen is more of that, aggressive sort of very sober existentialism, you know, sort of like a daytime insomniac. It's really ruthless and unforgiving, and I like that about it. Especially because I don't have to experience it. I can just listen to the record to know what that's like. So I'm taking something of a coward's way out sometimes. No, but you know, whatever. Like, nicotine, THC, it is what it is. No,
Sure.
but no, the thing is...
Nicotine, THC.
Yeah, hey, that's what we want. Or not. Well, ask me when I'm older. But no, the thing is, this is great. This is a terrific album. I love it. And you know what? It's more so it's amazing. You know what's interesting to note here is double albums of the 80s that have heaps of indie cred, like Husker Du Zen Arcade, Daydream Nation by Sonic Youth, and Double Nickels and Dime by Minutemen. They're not ever really accused of being these rockist propositions. They're just seen as amazing artistic statements, and I think they are. And the Moon Antarctica Sooner makes me think of those to an extent, compared to like OK Computer's very rockist and Roger Watersy to me. And even though I like the album, I think this is way better than OK Computer.
Sure.
I think this is very seamless and beautiful production, and the song "Tiny Cities Made of Ashes" is just amazing.
That's a classic.
The song finishes, and I play it again because it's a really fascinating, brilliant, exciting song for the new millennium. And God Almighty,
how they come up with that? That's a good song.
It's like when they're doing this strange little like harmless like mid 20th century like doo-wop boy band thing when they're singing in the verse, and then there's like this very angry like where's your head at-esque like sort of like command.
It sounds like it's coming through a megaphone or something.
Yeah, inside your head. It's really, really good. Drinking, Coca-Cola. You guys used to play that. You and your brother used to play that at sessions. I'm like, who the fuck is that? I didn't know. I didn't listen to Optimus Mouse at that time. I was more into rocker stuff like, Yes, and Zeppelin and The Who, and I was into some sort of old stuff, but not much yet. And then I was into Sonic Youth at that time. That was one of the ones I was really into.
Yeah.
Daydream Nation. But no, I remember this song was amazing. And I didn't really get into Modest Mouse more so other than that song until a bit later. I never became a big fan just because this is the only album, as you were inferring a little bit, that I thought was really amazing.
Yeah.
The one after this is kind of good, but I never had much of a great love for it either.
Yeah, the other one after this is more so what I was describing, where a few of the songs are like really good, but as an album, it's a bit of a sort of letdown, Because the next album has a few of even their best songs somehow, but then as an album just isn't all that.
Yeah. But no, I think this one's worth the hype personally. As I said, I'm willing to claim it as. I used to say that's a couple of years ago. I was saying this is better than OK Computer. Yeah, I think it is. I confidently claim that now. I'm not trying to be too nasty to Radiohead, but Radiohead peaked with King of Limbs as far as I'm concerned. That's good stuff.
Sure.
And also, the 2016 one's probably my other favourite. So I'm all about 2010's Radiohead. Apparently.
Yeah.
I don't dislike.
It's good stuff, actually.
I don't dislike any of their releases, like Ben's onward. I think they're all pretty good in some capacity, but
sure.
None of those really changed my life, and I'm just kind of surprised. I'm always people talk about how Radiohead's this life-changing thing, and it's just how much music have you listened to? You know what I mean? They must have just been the first band you got into. You know what I mean? There are people from back in the day, from the 70s, who are Radiohead's great, but they don't think it's the best thing in the world. They just think it's another good band.
Yeah.
And one that caters to them, which makes the rockist accusations more palpable, I think. Because I'm not shit on those guys too much. If you like what you like,
that seems to me more typical of an approach to Radiohead. I do agree. Yeah, I don't know. Radiohead just it's more the I was gonna say. I don't want to have a go at Radiohead because I like the group in that same sense you just described. It's more that weird aura around them.
Oh yeah,
it's this aura of transcendence where I just don't particularly feel it.
Well, I was going to say, they used to get compared a lot to Pink Floyd, and, apparently on radio music, there used to be these huge OK Computer vs. Dark Side of the Moon discussions, and I don't want to be, some neo-boomer apologist too much, but, to me, it's Pink Floyd, just towering over Radiohead, and Dark Side of the Moon just, making OK Computer irrelevant. To me, that's obvious. They're not even in the same... we can talk about albums better than Dark Side of the Moon all day, that's fine, but, OK Computer's not even close to being one of them. Are you kidding me? Radiohead never did anything close to Pink Floyd's best work. To me, that's just... That's just unequivocally true, you know what I mean? To me, that's an obvious, but obviously but other people thought that it was worth debating. I was are you kidding me? Alright, I'm not saying, music's better than music shit in the 90s. If you want to point some things in the 90s that were on the par of '70s Pink Floyd, that's fine. I would say there are things from EMT to the world of hip hop to just general electronic music that would maybe handily compete. Maybe even see. Hey, let's compare Sigur Rós to Pink Floyd if we want. Why not?
Yeah,
Why not?
that's a better comparison.
That's fine. Like I'll happily have that conversation.
Yeah.
But Radiohead, like, just give me a break, frankly.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, Sigur Rós is a better.
Compare. I mentioned Sonic Youth before. Compare Sonic Youth to Pink Floyd if you want. Even fuck it. I love Sonic Youth. It's a different kind of music, I know, but like in terms of just like how impactful and sort of creative it is,
yeah.
Sonic Youth are wild.
Oh,
and like Pink Floyd, they churned out music over several decades that was quite interesting, I think.
And their freakouts.
Pink Floyd maybe a little bit longer, but still.
And their freakouts aren't that far removed from early Pink Floyd freakouts either.
And that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I'm praised for this one, and I guess maybe a few quick words on Modest Mouse after that fourth album.
Oh, the Johnny Marr era.
Well, it's interesting. They have 3 albums. 2000 after the 2004 Good News for People Who Love Bad News.
Yeah.
When we were talking about that, has the famous song "Float On."
Yeah. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a nice song. I've always thought that was quite decent, to be honest. But we were dead before the ship even arrived. That's from 2007. Yeah. Infamous for having Johnny Marr on it, and yet I think being considered until ones afterward. And there's something called Sad Sappy Sucker. I don't know what that is.
It's
I don't know what that is.
I think it's a rarities collection.
Oh, okay.
Because around the era of these first 3 albums, there's a bunch of EP.
No, that's right. I've
releases
seen
and stuff.
those. Yeah, on these sites. Yeah.
Like one's called Interstate 8. That's a good one. They got a few of these.
Yeah, it's interesting. The one with Johnny Marr is considered not a very interesting release, and I would actually have to agree with that. I've listened to it a couple times, and both times I was like, this could just be any forgettable band of this era. What happened?
They lost something a bit, yeah.
And I heard I think I listened to all of the 2015 album once, and I remember thinking it was like pretty good for what it was.
Is that Lampshades on Fire? Oh, that's a song on it.
The album's called Strangers to Ourselves.
Yeah.
And you're right, the second track is called Lampshades on Fire.
Yeah, I haven't heard the whole album, but I listened to that when it was new, and then didn't listen to the album.
And I remember hearing a bit of the 2021 Golden Casket. I thought it was kind of not amazing, but
once again,
not horrendous either.
I heard that song. It's called like the first release was called "Fuck Your Acid Trip."
Yeah, I remember that.
And I was just like, what are with these production choices? Maybe I should give that album a proper listen.
My memory of it is it's not outstanding.
Yeah,
it's not.
It felt a bit
not ideal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It felt like quirky,
a bit wonky. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they're trying to see how they fit in with like a more contemporary recorded music environment, and kudos to them for trying. But
that's how I felt. Kudos for trying, but it's just not quite executed.
Because Strangers to Ourselves is, I guess you could see that as like that's not that far removed from what groups are doing in the 2000s.
It was kind of lighter and in more of the chamber sense, you know. Or at least that Lampshades on Fire song felt like that.
Anyway, perhaps moving on to the next
let's keep it rolling.
Gaze Guevara, There Will Be No Super Slave. I was talking before about this would be the theme, hip-hop improving into the 2020s. That, I believe, is certainly the case here. Mike is young, Gaze Guevara is younger. He was born in 2000.
There's no such thing as being born in the 21st century.
It is very perplexing, I agree. I was born not that long before it, but still, it's still bizarre to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, people thought like Kendrick Lamar was politically serious. Try this chap.
Yeah.
He's actually, I've heard another one of his albums, the one before this, which is called Black Bolshevik, and he went under the name Jar Jar how do I pronounce Jar Jar O00? Yeah, it's naught. But yeah, but I chose to highlight There Will Be No Super Slave because I thought it was a very sort of lush but unpretentious production. I thought it was lyrically captivating. I know people like some people don't always on board with like some of the more colourful politics. I don't mean that as a racial pun.
Unlike the Gambino thing or whatever, like this guy actually had things to say.
Yeah, and even for those who find this sort of like angle of left-wing politics like too far for them, I don't have a problem with it personally, but if you do, like I'm going to bring up that quote from that Sergeant Hartman said to Private Joker in Full Metal. Private Joker said he was a communist. Sergeant Hartman yelled at him, "God damn it, Private Joker, you fucking commie rat!" You know, it's like it's like, you got some balls, but that's enough. Like Hartman, obviously wanted to kill every communist on the planet, but like the fact that Joker, even though a self-proclaimed communist, was willing to say that to his face was enough for Sergeant Hartman to decide that he deserved to be in charge of a unit.
Yeah, because he had balls.
It's the conviction that I think you need to appreciate at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's
It's not coming from a place of hate, and if you want to compare it to like the fascist equivalents, those are coming from a place of hatred and either like complete immorality or at best like gross amorality.
Yeah,
and so I have no interest in that sort of banal, like kind of aggressively uninteresting. Well, I forget all the unethical ghastliness of it, just the fucking banality of that sort of like, let's end history as soon as possible fascism. Like, who the fuck needs it? But at least if we're trying to enjoy records,
Sure. Well, that's why like ultra fascist right wing stuff is never really adopted as art, because like, underground stuff generally, just by its nature, leans left wing. Even if it's apolitical, the creators will generally lean that way.
Yeah.
Whereas the people that lean in sort of the right direction, the careerists and the money makers who want to be a part of the industry.
Yeah, yeah.
So in a way, the opposite is just the industry itself. Whereas like the right wing or like Nazi punk and stuff like that is like even off the scale of the Overton window of music in a way. It's just like complete outsider.
Yeah,
it's only for that ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like I feel like you think about like the fascist art of like Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, Spain, and like whenever these kind of states have popped up, it's just like their art was kind of shit. Like, and like when we're like in the underground world, like some libertarian artists like sort of pop up, but they're not like, they're sort of like where the stance on the economy is. I mean, that's one thing, but like they still believe in this strange sort of like chaotic, like everyone ought to be able and should do whatever they want to do. You know what I mean? So like that does lend itself to a certain flavor for the arts, among like something that's considered a vaguely right-wing belief otherwise, so that sort of libertarian. I think like people like Robert Wilson, you know what I mean?
Libertarian falls into the case of like when you just described why fascist art's shit, I was thinking, it's because they literally prescribe schools and styles and aesthetics, whereas like in the libertarian sense or any other sense, they let people and traditions form themselves out of just necessity, them existing. They don't prescribe a school or an aesthetic or a tradition. Traditions would just pop up out of a sort of natural osmosis or something, right? Whereas the Nazis would prescribe what is good art.
yeah. Because even in like take for example one of the ultimate like radical libertarian artists in this respect would be someone like D.W. Griffith, who I don't even think considered himself a racist. I think he was of a weird belief that the way he was portraying African Americans in The Birth of a Nation, it's like, oh no, they've improved since then, sort of thing. And it's just like, okay, dude,
sure.
It's still such a sort of ugly thing to believe. And plus, the whole like war of northern aggression thing was just empirically not correct. Just gross implications in of itself. But that sort of mad sort of like states' rights, radical American, which is the same thing that motivated John Ford later, perhaps not to the same extreme degrees, I don't think. But when John Ford makes like a film like whether it's these like sort of Catholic motivated films like Mary of Scotland, The Seven Women, or The Quiet Man, or the more sort of not quite like Confederate sympathizing, but like sort of exploring the angle of like a sympathizer and like what their life was like and the suffering they experienced afterward in the film like The Prisoner of Shark Island. It's like that sort of more libertarian bend that someone like John Ford has lends him to still create a film that is sort of very assertively filmic rather than being sort of banal like sort of treatise on like boring values, the way these like Cecil B. DeMille epics are, leading into things like William Wyler's Ben-Hur in 1959, and compare like the more sort of radical sort of Trumbull and like Kubrick directed Spartacus compared to the banality of Ben-Hur, you know what I mean? Like the sort of Judeo-Christian like sort of just the most boring kind of it in Ben-Hur versus sort of like humanist radicalism, anti-slavery courageousness of Spartacus, you know, right down to like publicly putting out that a blacklisted screenwriter who'd written the film, you know. It all culminates in a more interesting sort of convicted product insofar as all the decisions made that culminate in the end work itself, you know.
Yeah.
So it really is just, frankly, logistically, even regardless of what your politics are, like you might be the most like. Borges was a very right-wing guy, apparently, but he knew that in the world of creativity, you had to sort of like throw all that out the window. You know what I mean? Like, there's zero politics in Borges' writing.
Yeah.
You know, it's all, well, maybe some of the non-fiction, like, vaguely. But even then, like, there's a very sort of dismissive attitude toward formalism in Borges, which there's few artists as prominent as that whose politics seem so disparate from their art. It's kind of fascinating, actually.
It's probably a politics of necessity.
Well, it's just that he liked that sort of like high aristocracy thing in a way, and he thought that would just sort of be sort of nanny state that enabled like his like playpen. Like he was very close to his mother his whole life, you know what I mean?
Sure. And he was from an aristocratic family.
Yeah, you know, that's sort of the world he came from, and like he believed that, you know, artists should do as they willed effectively. But I think he sort of believed that had to be done in the paradigm of like you know, sort of a state enabling all of this, and like, you know, they didn't want to get politics involved in any of this,
like a Platonic philosopher king bureaucracy or something.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I think that's probably a good way of putting it. But anyway, like onto this album. But I thought that was like fairly, or at least semi-relevant.
No, that was relevant. Yeah, definitely.
It's just amazing how it's like I mentioned how like what's missing about new pop group albums compared to the old ones. It's conviction at the end of the day. All that creativity came from a determination, which someone like Gais Guevara have. Hopefully he doesn't quite go the way of what was the, I can't remember the name of the Eldridge Cleaver, is that the name of the Panther, who became sort of a Reaganite in the 80s?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, like hopefully he doesn't go the way of that, because I guess maybe this is semi-relevant. I was reading recently, speaking of Mark Ames was recommending, he was saying like one of the few, he was saying, hey, it's amazing how like kind of banal and like talentless a lot of the writers on the right wing are, but he said one of the few, and how kind of disappointed, like he used to be right wing when he was young, sort of a bit contrarian in the Reagan years, but he's like, man, all these writers are shit. But one that sort of stood out was this Indian man, like Vaipur, like Vaipur, and or U-R, and he was sort of like a, you know, like Western chauvinist from India, effectively, and born in India, but seemed to have an admiration for European British conservatism. And he came to America in like the Reagan years, I believe. He's in America during the Reagan years, and he's appearing at the RNC in 1984. And infamously at this RNC, Eldridge Cleaver appeared to sort of renounce his past beliefs and talk about how he thinks Ronald Reagan's just a Muslim man or whatever. And
Jesus.
Eldridge Cleaver said he was watching this speech and he was just like, you know, because he went back, he used to like sort of berate Cleaver's writings in the late 60s, but he kind of was like watching Cleaver and he's like pitied him. He's like, perhaps being as like, you know, also a person of color, he was like, am I this? Like, he kind of fought to think hard, like, because he realized that American Reagan conservatism was actually, I think he remained a conservative, but he sort of realized that this sort of American, sort of like, vaguely like corporate, irreligious, like pseudo-religious conservatism was really sort of crass and not for him. And he went back and he said he didn't agree with what Eldridge Cleaver had written in the 60s, but he at least liked the ferocity of it, which he wanted to keep in his own writings, even if he was of the right. And so the reason I bring up Cleaver is I hope Guevara, at least for the sake of his art, if nothing else, I mean, temper your politics if you so feel, that's all well and good. Although I would hope that if you're wondering if your politics are suffering or not, let your art decide your politics. This is a weird thing, but like when people make political nosedives in the recorded music world, their music tends to suffer. make sure your music isn't suffering first, and let your politics derive downstream of that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the guys who get very rich, their music starts to suffer, and also their political views regarding tax cuts for the rich, they shift quite a bit too. And their art suffers as seems to suffer around the same time as that. So the fact of the matter is, with this album, it's probably more. I would have, if I was talking about, if I wasn't talking about Mike or perhaps the other album on this show, I'd have gone on my spiel about hip hop in the 2010s versus the 2020s in regard to this album.
Sure.
But I already went on it regarding Mike. But there was also other things worth talking about in regard to this album's politics. Now I feel as though that sort of great radical political conviction lends itself to fascinating art. I mean, even Henry Cow, if they were any less sort of communistic or socialist, would the music have suffered for it? Of course.
Yeah, well, the politics in this case is art. I mean, it's, once again, I'll say it's on the album cover. Like, look at that album cover. Like at first I didn't even realize it was political in nature, because it just looked like good art. And then I looked at it a little harder, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. Like, this is interesting, right?
Yeah, and
it's sort of conveyed there, right there.
And who would you vote for?
Anti-Banksy.
A party, like a political party that would condemn this? Or a political party that would, even if it didn't endorse it, was like, yeah, go for it. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And that's what it comes down to. And I realized that what really made me resonate with punk was the concept of art punk, and how that was like still sort of like there was no removal from the sort of quest for authenticity or credibility of the punk revelation of the late 70s. But you could also sort of take seriously the art world in sort of that sort of university gallery sense, you know, in this, in the conceptual sense, you know.
Yeah. Punk rock was like a cathartic vessel to make an artistic statement. To those bands, you know.
And people like,
whereas to like just straight ahead punk bands, it was just a cathartic thing.
Yeah, it was just very kind of working class, sort of like basically like a more classy, sort of less sort of bulbous AC/DC.
It was music for dancing. You know, that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, or moshing, as we later called it.
Yeah. Well, they called it slam dancing.
Ah, yeah, true.
You know, and moshing is just a form of extreme dance.
Yeah, it's very true, yeah. But so art punk really, really, really appealed to me, and plus, you know, all the art punk bands, my favourite punk bands, more or less, Wire Magazine.
They're great bands.
Because
punk rock was a good cathartic vessel, which is why all those art punk bands are so good, and what puts them over just the vessel itself, you know. Like the Ramones are okay, but they're mostly just
American.
Yeah,
I've heard the British bands,
and maybe a list.
Not status quo. A
little less cathartic and a bit more like, you know, Monkeys, pop or whatever.
Yeah, that's the thing. Well, speaking of someone who became a mad conservative later on, actually.
Yeah.
God bless. He said, "God bless George W. Bush" in like 2004. It's like, you fucking genocidal maniac.
As far as the state of like contemporary hip hop goes, I guess, because I did have this thought as like the first track. If I remember, there was an intro song.
Yep.
But then the first track after the intro, just has this like very fuzzy bass, like almost like sub bass, but the way it's utilized is like in a landscape sense. Like I was listening to it with headphones, and like the fact that they can use like overdriven, like hyper compressed sub bass in like a landscape sort of form, like it's psychedelic music, just tripped me out. You know the low end theory. I was just like, man, it's not a theory anymore. The low end is realized. That's one thing I do like about contemporary hip hop. The way it does use that, like, very deep, hyper compressed bass is just—it's so sweet, and when it's not used as a gimmick, but in like a more psychedelic fashion, like in the first track, I do think it goes off. It's this is a great album. Maybe the flow just gets a bit like repetitive. A bit typical of like the trap, you know, like humna and humna flow. But you said he was pretty young, so that I felt was indicative of like someone sort of learning to MC. You know, you sort of start off just by doing the sort of what's become traditional forms, you know. So that's probably the one thing I would say. But even in that quality, it's a sort of like being young, a sort of like charming. Growing pain, you know.
Yeah. I ought to mention the reason I brought up the art punk thing is because I was experimenting with this idea of the politics of art punk, and I was thinking, what if, oh my god, it dawned on me, art punk, why can't we can improve that sort of base vulgar form of and have, say, art communism or art socialism. And I was like, that's maybe I can describe, if I need to describe my politics in future, I could describe myself as potentially an art communist or an art socialist.
Nice.
Or as I joked in the video I did on the film in question, a carry feminist.
A carry feminist? That's a funny one.
Like, in terms of, like, what kind of feminist are you? I'm a carry feminist. Carry is my feminism.
Nice.
It's like, sort of like, enter shame, and also, like, if you need to, like, give them a bit of payback, maybe every now and again, it's maybe not the most moral thing, but it's undeniably gratifying at the same time, let's face it.
Damn it, carry.
And if the survivor has to be the star Amy Irving of The Fury, it's a fine thing, because then she can go star in that film because she got the powers from Carrie by accident. And that's my fan theory, which is bullshit.
Yeah, well, it's pretty much the same movie.
Oh, come on.
With, like, spy thriller.
The Fury has a lot more.
Yeah.
The Fury is one of the most, like, assertively conceptual works of 20th century art. That movie's so intense. I have, like, a 20-minute video on it.
Sure.
Break it all down for the world, and it's better than anyone else's YouTube videos, but then so is the vomit in a toilet, to be fair.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think this is a brilliant album, one of the great icons of the 2020s recorded music world thus far. I'd recommend it to everyone, and even if you want to, like, think wag about the politics, I just want to say, like, get the fuck over yourself after a while. Like, who gives a stuff? And, like, at least, like, 98% of it's, like, basically correct, frankly. Probably. Maybe a little bit less. Anyway, but you want to move on to your next pick of this day?
Yeah.
Fortnight.
We'll get on to my first pick that's named after some sort of mortality. We got Tiger's Jaw, Belongs to the Dead.
Mortality?
Oh, because they all have dead in them.
Oh.
If you remember.
I do remember now,
yeah. Now, this is a funny one. I was, for some reason, listening to this again recently, just prior to that last Mandala we did, where you picked Foxing.
Oh, yeah.
And then I was looking at the related artist to Foxing, and I'm like, that's hilarious. Tiger's Jaw was there. I'm like, oh, man.
Oh, what's the connection, actually?
Probably from the same sort of world.
Oh.
That, like, 2010s Midwest, like, emo pop sort of thing.
Okay, I thought maybe they had members in common.
Nah, probably not.
I know Foxing has, like, had a few line-up members to come and go over the years, so...
Okay.
Yeah, so go on.
Yeah, well, I guess not, because Tiger's Jaw, like, very quickly just turned to complete trash. Whereas, Foxing, at least that album, I haven't heard their stuff from, like, say, 2014.
Oh, yeah.
But that new album was quite good. A lot better. And, like, yeah, this is the first sort of Tiger's Jaw release, and it's, like, it's made by two, probably, like, 17-year-olds in their, like, garage or bedroom, you know? And, like, I'll probably get into later with your last pick, is, like, an example of, like, when you do that sort of style with higher production values, it can sound good. Mm-hmm. Whereas they very quickly, with that sort of, like, you know, like, late pop punk or alt rock sort of, like, New Sincerity era production, it just didn't suit them at all. Whereas, like, you can probably tell from this album, it's just, like I said, very cheaply recorded. So it's sort of in the vein of, like, bedroom pop, even, like the sort of thing that started maybe about 10 years after this. And you can just tell they're, like, just sort of young, hungry, interesting sort of songwriters, just scraping together little, like, basic chords and melodies that are just coming so I feel naturally to them. It just reminds me of when you first try to start writing music, and more so than myself, like, these guys, I guess, had better pop sensibilities. So you get this sort of, like a sort of naivety, but also, like, creativity at the same time, which you just don't get from more, like, learned songwriters, that songs will typically feel more strained and, you know, just, like, overwrought in some way, or, you know, just maybe too touched upon.
Yes.
Whereas, yeah, something like this, it's just, like, simple chords that, you know, any guitarist can get to. and maybe they just get there because they're only 17 years old, but the way they'll arrange it in that sort of naivety, you'll come up with really creative, just simple chords. Like, it reminds me of, like, early Cure in a way, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Same sort of thing, just a fresh, young take on guitar chords, you know? And actually, come to think of it, eventually becoming overwrought in, like, you cited Disintegration later on.
They're one of the most kind of tragic
Like
examples of that whole world. Yeah,
like, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, and Disintegration, and stuff like that. You feel like his songwriting he's exhausted all these little elements, you know? And so now they just have to focus on these albums as production pieces.
I would go so far as to say that, I mean, the songs on The Head on the Door, a lot of them are amazing, but that's the one where the production became sort of the main force.
That's where it starts, yeah.
Because the songs, I mean, I like some of the tracks, particularly like sort of later on the top, but like you're starting to think, this isn't up to scratch. You know what I mean? Like some of these songs are a bit, because, you know, members came and go from that band, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have to wonder, like, who was contributing some of the more interesting qualities of the group at times, because I've never thought Robert Smith was an overwhelmingly intriguing personality compared to Curtis or Morrissey, or even like McCulloch's sort of yearnings seem to like entrance me way more than, I mean, the Cure's albums were amazing, and like the soundscapes were glorious, and like some of those just like word choices were very just compelling in their own right, just because they were just, you know, you fall in love with somebody else, and that's great, but like, you know what I mean, like, it's not really, it's just sort of a very hooky refrain.
Yeah.
To call the Cure hooky's kind of odd. Well, at that, they became a very
it's
band.
no, that's true. It's like a dirgy song that has a hooky refrain.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sort of the Cure in that era. That's sort of middle era, I guess, or a bit like that. Definitely.
Yeah, tangent about the Cure, gone Tiger's Jaw. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all good.
Well, no, it's not.
I think
an album coming out, so I guess that's why they're on our mind.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and also, yeah, just that sort of that ferocious like energy that young songwriters have. I don't know. I just feel this album captures it in a way. Like I like their first like 2 albums that aren't this one when I was like a teenager, but I can't listen to that stuff now. It just sounds so raw and like. I guess similar to the Cure, like I think these guys were good songwriters, because even on that first album, they got like it's a great song about like Brian Jones. It's like an emo pop song about Brian Jones called I Saw Water. But in the case of like being an anti-Cure, the refrain on that song is just terrible, ruins the song. Whereas like, yeah, there's just like none of that on this album. It just feels more like, yeah, really creative pop songwriting teenagers just in their garage. Like, it's a very sort of intimate album like that. Goes for about 25 minutes and then it's over, you know. It's
happy about that, yeah.
Yeah, I remember buying it when I was a teenager at like a record store around the time they reissued it. And I was just like, yeah, I'm glad I bought this, because this is just like way better than all their other stuff. And I was like, I'm happy that this band, in my mind, can just be this little bedroom pop statement, you know? At least, yeah, I guess I picked this album because I have sort of fond memories of it, and I still enjoy it to this day, actually. It's just like a short little listen that is sort of indicative of a movement that I'm not the biggest fan of, but it started like 10 years after. So in a way, they were like pioneers.
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of that movement either, and like,
yeah.
Look, I didn't, I didn't enjoy this too much. Like, you're thinking about it now and sort of like reflecting it back upon it, hearing what you're saying, and like actually like reflecting upon how I'm feeling when I'm actually listening to it versus sort of where it's really gripping me, sort of stimulating me or not. Like it does, like it is genuinely likable in its own way. I can't deny that.
Sure.
I like the quaintness of it. I like the unpretentiousness of it. It's not like it's not really something I would ever choose to go back to. Like, it would never just float in my mind at any point. And if I saw it as like on YouTube recommended, I might think, oh yeah, that, but I doubt I would ever click on it. You know what I mean? But no, I can definitely appreciate what they were going for, and I can't disagree with anything you said there. Absolutely. Yeah, no, I do see a quaint likability in this for certain, and I believe one of the other. I think what was interesting about this little world of the indie sort of I guess, quaint acts is that they really I guess you brought up New Sincerity. I do like quite appreciate like where a lot of that new sincerity is coming from. I tend to have mixed feelings about a lot of the end, some of the works themselves, frankly. But whether it's films or literature or recorded music, but I like how they were looking for more beyond that sort of snarky sort of like no end in sight, or just sort of like flatline history inside of like outside of history, sort of like smirking at a Gen X. Not that these guys were Gen X / early millennial, obviously, but no, they're 17. You said they would definitely would have been millennials.
Yeah, they'd be like early millennial, I'd say.
Yeah. So like I do appreciate like how this world sorts of, they're like they wanted to see a more of an optimistic perception of the future going forward. And I think part of it is the world seemed so daunting and enormous and sort of interconnected at that point in the 2000s that it seemed only natural that where human emotions did arise, because seemingly they were being suppressed everywhere, where they did arise, they would really resonate with people. And I always thought of Michael Almereyda's film Happy Here and Now has a great quote in it where there's a character at one point in that film played by, what's that famous actor's name? But I'm gonna hate myself for this later. But yeah, like he's trying to film this like independent film, and he's got some amateur actors together, and they're going to shoot in this little house, and they ask him like, so like, where's this going to be? Like, is this going to be on television or screened anywhere? And he's saying, we're going to release on a video, and it's going to be on the internet, and blah blah blah. And then the actress, she sort of seems to smirk a bit, and she's like, what's the point of that? Who would want to see that? And he kind of very impassionately claims like, at the dawn of the 20th century, there are these little things, these little inventions known as the Nickelodeon. So people would go in and watch these tiny little images, these motion films of these clowns juggling, or like people, even just holding hands and dancing, things like that. Very innocuous, everyday, sort of seemingly plain activities. And the masses of the world are far more invested in these things than all those large, elaborate circuses with all their gargantuan elephants and acrobatics, and those became things of the 19th century. And moving forward with these intimate, small, interpersonal, dramatic exercises. And this character is claiming that the blockbusters on the silver screen will go the way of those circuses in lieu of more intimate, personal, and sort of direct, felt dramas. And considering the popularity of social media and these internet worlds and videos of people talking about their lives compared to all these films at the cinema that everyone's kind of distressed that they're not going to, I think that character was onto something.
No, that's true. And it started with reality TV before it's morphed into a sort of augmented reality TV, which is what social media
reality TV was the first social media, or prototype.
And augmented reality TV is one of the most popular formats.
It's so similar to how people interact with social media, media on social media,
But what is interesting is, you've proposed this before, and it is a thing people do mention, ironically enough, on the internet, is that there's no, outside or whatever, or, scenes of people doing things outside. I even saw a comment recently, I saw, a video of the Corrupt FM, people just do nothing, people doing a live show, last year or something, and the top comment is I'm so glad things like this are still going on outside, or whatever. And I'm like, wow, that's hilarious. And in a way, one of these, something like this scene, the Midwest emo scene, that this band sort of were one of the bigger parts of, was a weird case of that. It was a, like I said, Midwest, a place in America similar to Australia is, culturally isolated, and the coast don't care about them. So they create this, internal scene of outside, of gigging and stuff like that, which somehow is one of the last bastions of that in indie rock or whatever. But the only reason it got big, huge outside of the Midwest, was because it was popularized by Tumblr. And so it was like very Tumblr aesthetic. It was like this Midwest emo sort of music from around this time. And so funnily enough, the internet actually like put this scene that started off as like a localized thing into the sort of worldwide sphere.
Yeah.
Strangely enough. Which is a sort of, I guess, example of where like the internet needs the outside just as much as the outside needs the internet now, you know?
Yeah, the internet and social media are definitely going to propel more people to gigs, but the fact is, like, pre-internet, like, people were just compelled to, like, go outside. Like, everything you got was outside in these record shops, for example. And at the record shops, you find out about local gigs, and so that was just...
Oh,
like,
sure.
about it.
Definitely in the context of music, but that was a big, like, fear people had at one point, that everyone would just stay inside and watch television all day.
Yeah.
Like, that is the sort of world that movies like Network and stuff like that exist in. This sort of idea of hyper television watching. And if, in my personal experience... My grandmother was just, like, addicted to television.
Right.
That's all she'd ever do. For, like, my whole existence of knowing her was just watching television.
Right, yeah.
Nothing else, really. Not much else.
Wow. But, so, like, when you had that, I think if everyone knew about... The thing is, it's like, there's so many sources of information on the internet that, like, it can be kind of hard to keep track of, like, where the gigs are at and what's going on. I think if there was one big social media platform that sort of everyone used, and a lot of people have deserted Facebook for many, I think, valid reasons.
Yeah, very valid.
And Facebook's like the closest one where, like, if you follow all your favourite bands on Facebook, the only place where this is going to be, wherever it's in, you know, Sydney or wherever you are in America or the UK or elsewhere in Australia or New Zealand or Western Europe, wherever the fuck you are, you follow all your favourite local bands on Facebook. Chances are that's how you're going to find about the gigs. You know?
That was
chances are most of those bands would have a Facebook.
Yeah, or like Facebook
or an Instagram or a YouTube channel or something.
Facebook events at one point was a decent way of finding gigs.
Like the early 2010s, I remember that.
Yeah. You'd find local gigs on that, but yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe you can still do that. I have no idea. But that was what people were using to promote it. That's definitely true. It's interesting. What would be the main social media music promotion? Maybe still Facebook, I would assume.
Yeah. I think the main thing going forward is that I think we need to sort of do what feels organic as we go forth with sort of artistic / culturally libertarian pursuits, you know what I mean? Like, there's... To kind of force that sort of old school sort of outside gigging world to continue would feel like a bit of a, like, if we had to go out of our way to do that, it wouldn't feel right, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think, like, if it does fall back into that a little bit, so be it, but I would hope it occurs more in a more sort of natural manner than something that we just felt like we were doing it because we were obligated to, you know what I mean? Like, I've been happy to see a very small number of shows, but they were more like a major sort of big events.
Sure.
A bit over $100 for in some cases nowadays, especially post-COVID and all that, to go see them. But, you know, those are acts that you inevitably hear about those, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
In this case, Devo and future instance, where rather soon in the future, OMD. But also, you know, having seen New Order in 2016 or the Pixies in 2014, you inevitably hear about those. Whereas, like, actually being on Facebook and in contact with a particular... maybe I would have found out about this anyway, but, like, the great Ethiopian jazz wonder, Mulatu Astaki, playing in Sydney, you know, being able to find out about that, you know, that's just one of the great performances one could ever witness. Especially seeing music that was used in my debut feature film, which is not on very good pictures as of yet, just for a couple of reasons related to it being shot in certain places, which might not approve that they were filmed there. You know, a certain education establishment, perhaps. But the seeing music that you used in one of your feature films, like live, that was just spellbinding. But anyway, so you want to share more about this one? Sorry.
No, I'm pretty much exhausted on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, if you invite a chick into your band, don't crush on them. That's my bit of advice.
Okay, that's probably very, very brilliant advice.
Yeah, I think it's key.
Anyway, I just wanted to check if you had anything else to say, because before I moved on to my third pick, Purple Moonlight Pages by R.A.P. Ferreira. His debut release. Not quite as young as the two previous guys. This guy, but still pretty young.
How dare you.
4 years older than me. He's born in 1992, Chicago, Illinois.
Nice.
It says they're currently based in Nashville, Tennessee.
Is this a debut?
Enough. It is.
No way.
I know, right?
Yeah, I thought this was like vet shit.
No, he's got albums since then, which I don't think I've really explored as of yet. Not to my memory.
Oh yeah, was this 21?
20.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, talk about like really creative, exciting hip hop coming out in the newer decade. Obviously, if something like this had come out in the 90s, it would have just blown everyone away. And if something like this had come out in the 2000s even, this would have been a revelation. And I think because we were so saturated with acclaimed hip-hop releases and all these like really eclectic, inventive things in the late 2010s, that by the time something like this comes along, it barely seems to my knowledge, make a splash in the world. Like, maybe I'm just out of the loop here, but I remember in the late 2010s, people were talking, mid to late 2010s, you'd hear discourse, whether it was in like other media or you'd overhear conversations when you were outside or even engage in these conversations. I'm not the most social person in the world, so I'm not, especially at that time. So I was not really engaging in conversations more than I was overhearing them, frankly, or being in the same room as a conversation taking place, you know what I mean? Not like, spying or anything fucking like that. Just workplace, like, kind of break rooms, things like that.
Yeah.
Warehouse. People will talk about figures like, depending on where you were situated in this sort of, in the culture, like Matt Comey or Lil Ugly Mane or, stuff like Travis Scott or Bones. And,
good old Bones.
Yeah, some of that stuff was very good, I would say, actually.
Juice WRLD.
But where's the place for R.A.P. Ferreira? Because to me, this is like a beautiful exercise in a lot of the old, like, early 90s sort of De La Soul / Digital Planet era jazz rap tropes. Within a more refined, sophisticated sort of like
I was gonna say
canon of hip hop on your back, and so you make sort of the best of it, like tribute to the old masters, but still sort of doing something seemingly new and inventive as a result of that sort of direct inspiration of the ingenuity. Because it does feel like a conscious act of homage, but also like an attempt to sort of fuse them with more. It's almost like seemingly sonically lamenting some lost styles that sort of seemingly went by the wayside because they weren't, because new genres came along, like the marketing people said the old marketing people said the old styles are shit and out of whack.
Come to think of it, as opposed to what you just described, it might even be the fact that rather than homaging like, jazz rap and acid jazz and shit like that, seemingly modern jazz has gone more the way of hip hop and more in this sort of direction. Where, like...
Yeah, one thinks of Kamasi Washington, for instance.
Yeah, well, like, in a way, I feel like acid jazz and, jazz rap and stuff literally did contribute to the language of jazz. Like, they wanted it to not just be hip-hop, but a continuation to jazz vernacular, right? To the point where, like, I guess even Miles was interested enough to do doo-bop.
Yeah.
It's, which I think is indicative of that as well, and indicative of where jazz is going, more in line with being like a jazz hip-hop fusion sort of thing.
Yeah.
And this album was a great example of that, almost like a jazzmatazz finally fully realised properly, And just sort of like, oh man, whoever the keyboard player was, because even in that jazz sense, the opening track is in a hip-hop, intro sense as well, but it's him, and I guess the jazzmatazz sense, him just doing the old jazz, counting the players and naming the players and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
The second that started up, I knew what I was in for, and it sort of even like was a step above what I was expecting, even from that intro,
There's a few credited players for piano, Moog, keyboard, or Rhodes,
Yeah, nice. Because Moog and Rhodes, definitely, yeah. It had that cool Rhodes sound to it. That 70s, like, I was saying earlier, Weather Report, jazz fusion keys. Beautiful. Which isn't in enough, like, jazz rap. The only other one I can really think of is that Tribe song, Bonita Applebomb, which, like, in the break after the chorus has, like, those beautiful, like, 70s jazz fusion key sample. It's, which is all over this album. It was sort of my favorite part about the album, to be honest. The keys are brilliant. But yeah, no, good piece, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, like
and yeah, like a jazz hip hop fusion, properly realized, right? It's neat, I think. Like jazz bands in high schools in America are now covering like MF Doom songs and stuff.
That's true. Yeah,
Like I feel that the hip hop has become jazz standards in a way.
that's interesting.
Which
yeah,
is awesome, I think, honestly.
well, it's interesting that I remember I heard KB on MLC say that when it got to a point where you'd hear in the 21st century marching bands do songs like Iron Man at these sort of events,
Yeah.
like Black Sabbath, and he was like, when he was a kid, that was a new song. No one ever thought that would become like an institution. That was like a song that kids who were rebels like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like adults hated that shit.
Sure,
It's
sure.
Like, it's just like such a moment.
Yeah,
It's
but the riff
fascinating.
had just become so well known.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Because the same thing happened with Seven Nation Army.
Sure, yeah.
Now
yeah.
stadiums at every sporting event just hum it, you know? It's
Yeah.
a bit annoying.
I don't like that song or that group. And
Yeah, but it's similar to Iron Man or Smoke on the Water. It's just such a simple riff. It's sort of
all hell, yeah.
it's made for that sort of shit, you know.
Mm. But yeah, no, I guess the reason I didn't actually deliberately attempt to choose free hip hop albums for this. This 2020s sort of
Oh, the next two are hip hop as well.
not really. Well, what really happened was like I was going through highest rated albums in the 2020s on RYM, and I was the ones that were really sort of sticking out to me and appealing to me, and I kind of tried to listen to some things here and there during the day times, and like all of these I'd heard within like the last like year or two. None of these were like that new to me. Although the Ali X I would have only heard in like February when it came out. To be fair, that's my next pick. Just
Yeah, yeah.
and Twikipedia's from this year as well. Excuse me. No, Twikipedia I only heard within the last 2 months.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, these albums I heard like I would have heard like last year or early this year, and R.I.P. Farrer I would have heard that probably in 2021 or two, not in 2020 itself, and as for Gais Guevara, like that would have been at some point last year, maybe in 22, maybe in 20, because when it was like high rated and toward the end of 22 I might have listened to it around there. It doesn't matter. Point I'm making is it's like the albums that just would stick out to me were hip hop albums. It's almost as though it's gotten to the point where, like, you know, when, and maybe hip hop ought to have was seen to have gotten to this place before, because it's weird how we were saying in the 2010s we were complaining that hip hop was in like a 80s Rolling Stone magazine place, but it's like hip hop now got into like a place of like where jazz was in the 50s through to the 70s, where like in the 50s and in the 60s, like, well, the early 60s at least, the records worth buying were jazz records. Those were the good records. Like, you could get like classical, recordings of like old classical symphonies if you wanted, but the real good modern music, like all the pop banality was that. You wanted these cool bebop records. The bop LPs was where it was at.
Birds were.
And like the top albums of like any year in the late 50s and early 60s, they're all mostly going to be jazz records or bop records, just specifically perhaps.
Sure.
And because that was just a dominant good style, and it was it's not that it was it's not even that how do you say, like it's not like other forms of music were forbidden or anything whatsoever. If anything, there was maybe even a sort of snootiness at that time directed toward jazz in some parts of the culture, or maybe more like elitist sort of university types, but as opposed to maybe like sort of like magazine sort of like hip people. But it's like it was just the most organic, obvious form of music to appreciate, and it's not like rock music isn't allowed, or like pop music isn't allowed, or other forms of electronic music aren't allowed, but like the most obvious form of like enjoyable music now in an album format seems to be hip-hop. And like I like hip-hop as much as I like any other genre. It's just like, it's just sort of there for me. I never really had a phase where it was like the main thing I listened to, whereas even like when I was an adolescent I happened to heavy metal at one point. But now I would say I have a lot more appreciation for hip hop than I do for metal in general. I mean, that's just obvious to me. It's just like, it's not like I even like find elements of certain, I don't, for maybe obvious reasons, I don't necessarily resonate with hip hop deep in my soul.
Well,
and
I
it
think
would be
the
sort
thing
of
that helps
pretentious for me to
hip-hop in
claim
the
that it does.
like off the top of my head, the thing that might help hip hop in the 2020s is that it was born of a technology.
Mhm.
It's music that is like, you know, of course the electric guitar and say rock music's also technology. But what I mean is like hip hop's driven by audio engineering technology, like
it's also digital in particular.
PA systems, turntable decks, and then definitely, but it keeps up with that sort of tech, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
It even drove like, you know, digital music tech probably. Maybe hip hop and Peter Gabriel, but
And that's why all the innovations in production in analog 20th century era was rock music, because rock music was necessarily music for production, as Noel Oakeshott once was kind of saying to me. It's like, because with jazz you don't want production, you want as live a sound as
the
possible.
sound of the room, yeah.
Whereas with rock music, they weren't virtuosos whatsoever for the most part, so it was all about the production.
Well, that's what
all these
Sensei-
great, and obviously for the same thing with the pop music, but pop music tends to be of a very sort of light, very specific character. Art pop comes a couple of decades later.
That's true. I'm thinking of like
70s.
the Kink song. You really got me.
Yeah,
That's
there
what set
you go.
it apart. It's distinct
With
production
Game
choice.
Records, Pink Floyd, the Beatles. Like, it was this rock music that lent itself to production experimentation.
Yeah.
You know, George Martin had a few other production jobs, one would imagine, but like
Sure,
the Beatles
sure.
had lent itself to his sort of innovative techniques, for instance. Seemingly, when you look at the timeline of releases, at least.
Whereas, hip hop's still tied into the tech, and it's evolving along with the technology.
Yeah.
Whereas, like rock music,
Rock music and digital sort of have a weird relationship.
other than the production advantages you can get with it, to get like say the Modest Mouse album I picked earlier,
Exactly, yeah.
which takes advantage of that.
Yes.
but it's still the technology they're making the music with is still rock instruments.
Yeah.
Which you know, I guess if you want to get into my next choice,
Yeah, why not? Why not?
sort of ties in a way, because
Yeah, check this one out, but yeah.
definitely check it
Brilliant
out.
stuff.
Yeah.
Moving on to Tortoise.
It's a tortoise, yeah. Millions now living will never die.
Hey. Deaf.
Like, yeah.
The Florida band.
And speaking of death and the death of rock music, in a way, like, Tortoise are kind of the quintessential post-rock band, or at least when you think of post-rock in the almost mathy sense, and like, you know, tribally drum rolling patterns and stuff like that, seem to originate with Tortoise. Like, you know, Talk is one sort of thing. It's a bit ambient pop, same as like Bach Psychosis, which apparently I think Simon Reynolds coined the term.
Yeah, 94.
Off of that album, Hex.
Reynolds is the man.
Whereas this is like rock music, but almost made with like jazz sensibilities, but rock and like electronica production, and it sort of mixes all these like art music styles into like the end of rock music, and I guess that's why it's called sort of like post rock. And there's just something about this album, like Tortoise. One of the earliest sort of post-rock bands I got it into as well, funnily enough.
Yeah.
And, like, there's just something so fascinating about it where, like, it's distinctly, like, it comes from that world of, like, you know, DIY punk rock and stuff like that. Like, I only found out recently, one of the members on this album is the guitarist from Slint. I never even realized that. Yeah, he's not on their first album. But so it's kind of from this world of that sort of punk music, but maybe similar to like Derudy Column. It has these like ambient sensibilities to it, where it's almost like you know when you think about like the progressive rock world and the sort of like sprawling prog rock records and stuff like that. Like post rock sort of feels like prog came full circle in a way.
Yeah.
But it didn't embrace the sort of like raucous tendencies of prog rock, like the note density and, you know, those sort of aspects.
Yeah.
In a way, this album reminds me most of, like, that world of, funnily enough, of prog rock, like, behemoth albums. One of the ones I like the most is Tales of the Topographic Ocean, the Yes album, right?
Yeah.
And that's the one that, funnily enough, I didn't even realize got all this, like, flack from prog people.
Yeah.
Whereas to me, it felt like listening to one of these sort of post-rock albums, you know? They take that idea of, like, ambient stretches of, like, almost, like, tribal music and like, a sort of like ethereal, like you know when sometimes your mind, when you just stare at a wall or something, you know, you just let it sort of float away. It goes into like it's not even like a meditative state. It's almost like a sort of like blissful vegetative condition. In a way, this sort of post-rock music induces that sort of bliss in a way. Like a sort of an awe where, you know the phrase where you're at a loss for words.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of like, I think, the peak like atmospheric or like sort of image projection that post-rock can achieve. And I think it's the world that, yeah, like I said, Yes got to even so many years earlier, but got like derided for it, right?
Yeah,
strangely enough.
For a few reasons, yeah.
Yeah, I guess for a few reasons, but probably mostly because they operated within the commercial rock music world. But the commercial rock music world was just in an interesting, scary place at that time, post-Beatles, right?
Well, it's interesting that both the prog people had an issue with it at the time, and also in retrospect, it's kind of a bit polarizing to this day. But obviously the people who had no love for prog rock were also the first in line to tear it to shreds, inevitably. But the thing with Tales of Topic Avocations is it sometimes reminds me of like 90s dense, sort of moody electronic albums in general and what they were going for.
Yeah!
So like, as someone who adores both of those things, like I like... my favorite Yes LP is actually I'm one of the seemingly rare people. Fragile is the one that's really, 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 really special to me. That's the first one I heard. I fell in love with Roundabout. not from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. That's a bit later for me.
I learned about that song from School of Rock.
Oh, okay, yeah. I'd seen School of Rock, but I didn't remember that moment.
Yeah.
I only saw it on television once, weeknight, or Sunday night. Sorry, still school's next day, but
the ultimate rockist flick.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Almost Famous, maybe, but that sort of tries to unravel the legends a little bit, though.
Yeah, that's a bit of both.
And I do quite like that film, actually. We'll talk about it on FOTD one day, maybe. Yeah, why not? But no, I think with Fragile was just the one that was really resonant with me. A Long Distance Run Around. I couldn't believe it. I still think Long Distance Run Around is one of the very top 5 best things ever. 5 or 3 best things they ever did. Like,
that's a great song.
Think about it. Like, Yes.
Even
Yes, who are known for just, you know, these long, sometimes overwrought epics potentially, do this gorgeous 3-minute song. It's unbelievable. Cold summer, listening, do. It's just waiting for the sunshine. Unbelievable. It's just magnificent. But
they do it well, definitely.
So yeah, no, like that's, you know. But other than that, Tales was my favorite. Is my favorite. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, like, that's just. It's such an easy thing to say, you know. And I love Drama a lot too. That's probably my 4th favourite. Obviously quite close to the edge of my 3rd favourite. But Drama's the other one where I'm like, they're onto something really brilliant there. It's a shame that it didn't sell, so they went with, you know,
so
after that.
Just to break the tangent, which, speaking of, another thing I was thinking of as well, which might have been an accidental inspiration for something like this album, is like Can. Like, there are strange stretches of like drumming in certain post-rock stuff that's very like Can-ish, you know.
Jackie, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, no, just listening to this album again recently, I hadn't heard it in quite a while, actually. Because, like, I remember I listened to a bunch of Tortoise quite a while ago. Like, I just sort of always would have it on repeat when I was getting stoned and stuff like that. Because it's just like interesting sort of ambience music, you know. And similar to Can, it'll just go into strange places, like percussively and stuff like that. And yeah, I don't know, there's just something so fascinating to me about like this world, these sort of bands, where like, in a way, I almost think it's the best rock music. Like, even though it's inherently like anti-rock, or like at least the danceable parts of rock music, like, which is the whole idea of it, which maybe a few, like when rock music gets into the form of like rockism, it loses the cathartic, because like similar like to I was describing punk earlier, that was the whole rock and roll revolution. It was this new cathartic dance music. It was for adolescent kids to dance to in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, the immediacy about the form, yeah.
The backbeat, and it was new. Like, that was the distinct form of it. Whereas, by this point, I guess rock music just, like, breaks down into all other forms of sort of out there music. And it's not catered to that sort of same adolescent audience. It sort of has its, I guess, acid jazz moment, and it's for more matures. It's for, like, the 29 to 38 demographic or whatever,
Oh.
you know. And maybe that's why I'm sort of like getting into that demographic. I'm just looking back on like these post-rock albums and I'm like, this is some of the best stuff. And like getting into stuff like, you know, the Thinking Fellas Union recently,
Yeah.
I'm like, these albums are genius. And that's of a similar vein as well. A bit more like punk rock mixed in with these sort of styles of like just, yeah, I guess it took America 20 years to catch up to the Germans. But when they did, I appreciated it. Stuff like this, I'm glad exists.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Oh no, it's really, really good. I would have heard some of this band before, but not extensively. And yeah, it's but it's the one I definitely have a memory of of listening to Tortoise. And I remember thinking it was having enjoyed it when I did listen to it, and listen to it now. Yeah, it's really, really good. You know, what's fascinating about that sort of post-rock world in the 90s is I feel like you take something like Nirvana, and a lot of what people found interesting, like the critics, I mean, about Nirvana was like, it's like the last throes of like this dying genre of rock. It's like, it's, you know, this like kind of like really sort of like, you know, this real sort of Alamo moment for rock music, maybe.
Yeah.
They were saying that before he actually passed away. And then,
Oh wow, you
I
compared it to
suspect.
the Alamo.
well, not that, but like, you know, I
Okay.
thought of that just to
But
see
that's an
great
interesting
last stand,
comparison.
You know what
yeah.
I mean? In American, you know, Texan or whatever. But not as violent, perhaps. But yeah.
If it's G.G. Allen, it is.
Well, that's true. Yeah. Well, he's an interesting manifestation, symptom of this idea too.
Yeah, the most extreme outward performative act of it. Yeah, definitely.
But with the post-rock bands, I think what's fascinating about those guys is that it's like what's rock music, where can it go next? And so they were just sort of really trying deliberately, consciously to create new forms of music with the rock instruments, and they were just trying to be as outside of everything that's been done as much as possible, while still being able to recognize what they're playing to each other when they're actually jamming, seemingly. And the end result is sort of like that sort of 90s DIY independent / alt rock band world fused with just that sort of do whatever we want, like, you know, sky's the limit. And yeah, it's really in opposition to where mainstream rock music was at the time, which is sort of, you know, in the Britpop sense, sort of very much looking back, very much so actually. And in that sort of post-grunge sense, also such sort of being regurgitated forms of like banal AC/DC-esque sort of Guns N' Roses tracks from the past 2 decades, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Just in the more of post-Nirvana sort of, but without any of the
Classic rock
prediction of
revival.
Nirvana. Just gross, you know. And so, yeah, bands like Tortoise are one of the best manifestations of it. And I used to like the band, I still kind of would to an extent, Mogwai and the album, their famous album from around this time. And like, to be honest, like,
Yeah,
this is a
Mogwai.
way better version of the Mogwai album.
I do agree, yeah. I always like Tortoise a bit more, but Mogwai are cool as well.
Yeah. I mean, like, yeah, there's a lot to like here, and it makes me think, like, oh, maybe I ought to explore some of the rest of the Tortoise stuff now.
Yeah, TNT's great.
Yeah,
And,
sure, that's what we see.
the other one, Standards. Standards?
Oh, let me look. Yes, that's
Yeah, that's pretty classic as well. They got some good stuff. I haven't heard much after that, though.
Yeah, okay, interesting. Maybe I might have to look into some of that in the next couple of weeks if I feel that motivation. But
Yeah, you do get the feeling. They're a very, like, sort of creative group.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Like, just, I guess a bit like the, slightly like, you know, I mean, the sort of, the parents of post-rock, maybe the Derudy column, or specifically the father of Vinnie Riley.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's sort of like, you know, he's like, he had his sort of guitar there, his electric guitar there, and he's wondering, you know, what else can we do? And it's just, what can we, let's say, if we could do whatever if someone told us we could do whatever we want with this rock outfit, what could we do? You know, if we felt there were no limitations whatsoever. And then Drudy Colin was exploring that idea on albums like LC in 1981. And I think that's a similar mission statement that bands like Tortoise have on this album.
Sure,
15 years later, odd.
Yeah. Well, it's when the Americans finally embraced it.
Yeah.
Because that early world of, like, proto-post-rock is, like, Derudy Column, Frippatronics. There's a few things out there. New Zealand dabbled in it. Yeah, like... Enya.
Sail away. I think I first heard that song in because I saw around the time it came out in cinemas here, early 2012, David Fincher's film of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and there's a scene where Stellan Skarsgård is torturing the Daniel Craig character to that song.
Damn.
And I was like, this is a song. Wow. And it's quite a good scene. The film's decent. I like most of Fincher's films.
It sounds
It's
like
based
the
off
Reservoir
material.
Dogs scene. Just
Exactly. Steelers wheel stuck in the middle of you.
You homage the homage.
Allegedly, it was Daniel Craig's idea as well, because I guess he didn't like the song that they were going to use, and he's like, "Why don't we use this?" He put up Enya on his phone. I guess as a joke,
Right.
Maybe Fincher, I guess knowing Fincher as well, he's like, "Yeah, actually, that's a good idea." It's fascinating, potentially. But anyway, do we have more to share about Tortoise, or are we going to move on to the next bit, perhaps?
No, except for the other great Tortoise one is Gamera. I think that's the name of the EP. But they got a song called Gamera, and I just love that a band called Tortoise has a song called Gamera.
You just have to.
It's classic.
Yeah,
It's
that
such
EP coming out the same year as that great 90s, the start of that great 90s trilogy.
Yeah, that's the other classic
Shusuke Kaneko.
Tortoise track. Yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, and I say, as I inferred, moving on to this album that came out in February of this year, talking about Girl with No Face by Ali X. When this first released, it was fairly quickly near the top of the charts of the most highly rated albums for the year thus far.
People like surreal album covers.
Yeah, and I do as well, so I was
yeah.
very, very keen to give it a shot. And when I listened to it, I heard an album which was very consciously trying to emulate a 1980s synth pop sound,
Sure.
like a lot of acts, indie sort of acts, are doing from the 2010s.
You know what I thought the first song sounded like?
What?
The Europe After the Rain song.
Oh, lovely!
Yeah.
John Fox. So if you've been checking the garden,
It's similar to that, or like which is also similar to another song like that of that era, Nowhere Girl.
Yeah. You mentioned that in the Mandala, actually.
Oh, okay.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
the piano.
I probably did. Yeah, it's definitely in that vein. But sorry, please.
Oh no, it's all good. But yeah, and so but it didn't have the sort of more sort of like tacky contemporary, or like very obviously at that time, or maybe to this moment still modern sort of like it's trying to do an 80s homage, but it sounds like modern, so it just sounds like sort of cutesy, you know what I mean? Like this did sound like they were, I mean, hi-fi in a modern sense, but those 80s synthesizers, it sounds like the synthesizers used in like Eastern Bloc disco, you know what I mean? That very sort of stark and just almost like tasteless sound, you know what I mean? And I like that this wasn't trying to have a taste to a synth sound. It was very much just like the sound of stock, like I said, Eastern Bloc sort of cold disco, you know what I mean?
No, definitely, but also definitely like stock and cheesy. But the key thing, because I felt the same way, and I was picturing this album with 80s production, and I was like, man, I'd hate this. But with this modern production, like the sort of fullness you can get out of the synthesizer sound, it doesn't feel like it's a two-dimensional glue pasting on the production.
Yeah,
it feels three-dimensional and like properly smoothed.
Mm-hmm.
It has no mechanical aspects of it, which you would get with the synth.
Yeah.
You think of Stock Aitken Waterman, like,
of course,
and it's
pointed,
very mechanical and pointed. Whereas this in the mix is just so rounded. It takes advantage of modern technology, but homaging the styles and aesthetics of that 80s synth pop,
Yeah.
like mechanical synth pop. The sort of cheesier world that's derived from John Fox and Gary Newman,
And the other very likable and intriguing thing about this album is, it's one of those many contemporary pop albums by some of these women who, and some of them are very interesting.
Who love Kate Bush.
That's true. That's one of the very most overt factors. But it's like
Kate Bush should just be called a genre now.
They have this, they're going to like display their sort of personality and the sort of like their quirks, and like this is like sort of like a year in the life of, or like a couple years in the life of this artist, and it's all their like traits and eccentricities and sort of in this sort of like art pop journal thing. And St. Vincent does it. That's the most Kate Bush-esque of them all, perhaps.
Yeah.
And Jessie Ware does it. and lots of individual, other than trashier artists in my opinion, like Lana Del Rey do it.
Yeah, sure. Even Taylor Swift's trying.
She tries to do it. Ariana Grande tries to do it.
Sure.
I don't know how many people think. Dua Lipa tries to do it. Whoever you want to name. And I don't really much care for it, but sometimes they do, sometimes they do. The Spelling album was actually one where it really worked. The one we talked about on Mandala.
Yeah, Spelling were pretty good.
And I think this is one of the more likable examples of that, because I felt as though Grimes is a big example of this too, because this is the most. Maybe it's partly due to the fact that Ali X is actually. She was born in 1985. She's a little bit older than some of these people, and she's from Canada, for whatever that's worth. Maybe it lends to a certain sense of humor and not taking oneself so seriously. But I felt like this was the most actually seemingly genuinely quirky and idiosyncratic of a lot of these female pop stars I've heard on these sort of albums.
It felt legit.
It felt like a girl, a lady who's she is weird, she's comfortable with it, and she's also ambivalent about the consequences. Whereas she's not trying to transform it into chic as a lot of those other artists like Grimes, and even to an extent, St. Vincent, even though the music's great, seems to be doing. They seem to kind of hope to be popular. Whereas Ali X, she'd probably be kind of not bemoaning of popularity, but sort of indifferent to it. And that's just the impression that comes across to me. And I'm not trying to claim I can read these people's minds, because that's definitely not the case. But I can only say what comes across. And this is easily one of the most likable of all these artists I've encountered so far. Yeah. And maybe it is just an age/wisdom thing, because those last couple Jessie Ware albums are really quite entertaining. And she's nearly 40. You know what I mean? So I'm just so she's just she just knows what she's doing, you know what I mean? She just has some self-awareness and isn't as driven by ego as younger people, men and women are. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to but I'm the last person to make that sort of thing. I can be a piggish man at the end of the day.
Pop stars are certainly driven by ego.
Yeah, well, exactly. yeah.
Always propelled by ego and ambition. And yeah, I would agree. This is more modest in its ego and more like you were describing is a good way of thinking about it, actually. Because I would describe it, proper idiosyncratic people and or sort of peculiar people. They're not actively looking for that as an aesthetic. That's just what they are, right?
Yeah, they don't know anything else.
And that's what I did like about this album. Sort of got me over the hump of I probably mentioned, avant pop is a bit of a misnomer, I feel.
Of course, yeah. But
But in a case like this, because like I said, it's just pop music itself.
Of course, yeah.
But the avant is normally the pop personality, the persona behind the pop music is where the avant comes in most of the time. And I think that's what you were saying, is this sort of faux quirkiness that's more appealing to oh, look at me, everyone, I'm weird.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas a proper weird person is just weird and that's who they are.
Yeah.
And that is sort of more the sort of tone I felt emanated from Ali X. It's sort of I suppose more authentic in that sense. And so when it was mixed in with the what may as well have been Madonna, dancier period or whatever sort of stuff, But with a legitimately sort of strange persona did sort of help that,
So it was a delightfully karaoke quality to what she. It's these are songs that don't exist that she's sing from the 80s that are in a misremembered timeline, and she's singing, you know what I mean?
Sure.
It's almost she just loves that sort of role play. Even it's not even she wants to be this sort of what Madonna was, a sort of superwoman figure. It's more that sort of personal sort of it's a more intimate expression rather than this sort of macro level I'm a superstar expression as Madonna's 80s anthems were.
It's sort of
maybe not all the first, some of the stuff in the first album's less so,
well, musically at least it's sort of similar, and it's more sort of party pop sensibility, which is why I sort of compared it to a Madonna, and I was thinking more in the 90s electro sort of thing, even though this does have more of a wash of 80s synth pop sensibility. But it's also got a bit of an EDM dance sort of thing to it.
For
as
sure,
well. And yeah, like the music itself isn't that avant, but I truly feel that the persona behind it is that, and so it's like it makes me less sort of cynical for what I said about that, like being skeptical of whether avant pop is really just not pop music.
Oh,
you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Because like we were saying earlier, things like Sia, or even like that was Lady Gaga's main thing.
Very
She would go to
sort of
galas
hollow,
dressed in a dress as meat, and it's like, oh,
Tacky,
it's Banksy-esque, you know.
Yeah, just sort of like
We're similar to
parenting very middle class sensibilities.
we're similar to Gaius Guevara. It's like that, where it is this legitimate, authentic expression. You know?
Yeah.
Or at least it doesn't come across as like pseudo in any way.
No, it doesn't. Not to me anyway.
And and the music itself is like I said, I was like, I'm glad that it's hopeful for me that like you can do more interesting things with synth pop stylings with modern production because of that rounded quality as well. I appreciate that. There's more to be done in that sort of vein, you know.
Yeah, hell yeah.
There should be someone should cover. Dua Lipa should do a cover of a Spacer.
A Spacer.
That would be awesome.
Now Rogers, bring him out of retirement to like touch up the production.
Imagine some modern pop star getting Nile Rodgers and someone else to come in and make like a mad version of that. Go off.
You know what's interesting is like I find it fascinating how this embodies this is a very she's born in 85. I guess she'd be a millennial. She turned 15 in 2000. She'd be one of these individuals who, like in that sort of, I guess, quasi-vapor world, they see like sort of that 80s / maybe early to mid-90s metropolitan sort of like binary pop world, like shopping mall world, is like this sort of Fantasia, this lost pre-9/11 Fantasia. So like rather than like, it's amazing how
which is what Isaac
that's like
was
sort of the sword and
describing
sorcery world now in a way, like that sort of mythical age.
Well, that's the
like that's like sort of it's interesting. That sort of more potentially introverted or quirky people like you into like sort of dreamscapes like that mode. You know what I mean? Like that's it just occurs to me now that can appeal to those people, to individuals of that ilk. I suspect, you know.
No, definitely the vaporwave thing is kind of that that
very much so
90s mallers and Arcadia and like Windows 95.
It's just a new Middle Earth for people, you know.
And come to think of it, vaporwave was like the ultimate millennial musical expression in a way.
Even though it was like seemingly there's a lot of younger people, more the Gen Z doing that, right?
Yeah, maybe earlier Gen Z, I suppose. I assume like Chuck Person was a millennial.
I think Chuck Persons was old, yeah, and that's 2010, so definitely, yeah, he would have been of the millennials rather. Gen Z would have been way too young to do that.
Yeah,
I guess I'm Gen Z, I suspect, and I turned 14 that year, so like I don't think anyone that young was doing Echo Jams.
But yeah, it's sort of interesting though, because like I was saying earlier with Isaac Brock and the Modest Mouse thing is like almost the nihilistic component to the reality of the 90s mall or whatever.
Yeah, of course.
Whereas the sort of nostalgia has painted it as a sort of Arcadia.
Yes. But,
that's definitely true.
Speaking of the post-rock dimension, that's been continuing as of this year, and another contemporary release. Do we go for the next?
Yeah,
piece?
Let's move on to the next one. My last one is another post-rock album. Yeah, Godspeed You, Black Emperor, which is the album's called what, like February 25th, 28,000 Dead, da 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 da. A very like sort of evocative title, I suppose. Which when I saw that they had a new album just on like my YouTube releases, I saw that was the title, and I'm like, you know what? Because I've never actually been, like I said before, like a big Tortoise fan and post-rock fan. I've never been the biggest like Godspeed You, Black Emperor fan. Like I like the first album and the Tiny Fist one or whatever, and the one after that. I forget what it's called.
By first, you mean the '97 album, because the '94 album came out within the last few years.
That's right. I forgot about that being a thing.
There's a clarification for the nerds who are, actually, like, yeah, I got you little twits.
Yeah, no, I was going to bring up the nerds later, because that's the problem with this band, really.
Come to me in real life. Want saliva in your face.
The nerds is sort of why I similar to some music like this, like, yeah, this band, its fans fall into the realm of Tool fans sometimes, you know. You know that there was a meme a few years ago about Tool fans just like having to tell people about how unique the time signatures of Tool were or something.
Yeah.
And that is the first impression I got when after I listened to the album. I just went on the RYM page for it, and I just was like, what are people's, because it was a new release as well, I'm just like, what are they saying? And it just reminded me of Tool fans, the way they just described this post-rock music. And it reminded me why I've always been sort of just like annoyed by the presence of this band in a weird way, even though the music theoretically is actually kind of amazing, you know.
Listen, a band named after the great Mitsuyo Yanagamachi film has to be good.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know about the film prior to knowing about the band, like, to be fair.
Sure.
Like, when I found out about the film, I was like, of course, I knew there was a reason.
Yeah, so anyway, I because I just saw the album and I was like, that's a provocative title, damn. Like, I'll give this a listen, and I was just like, yeah, this does fucking kick ass. And so, yeah, I found it so surprising just how stupid people are. So I just wrote my own review. It probably wasn't published. It's just like, enjoy the music, nerds. Just enjoy it. Because, like, it's not meant to be dissected in this way where they're talking about different melodic lines and all this sort of stuff. Like, to be honest, there's just a sort of, like, similar to the way, like, I remember once reading a Pitchfork review of that first pop group album, and they would describe the songs as, like, breaking, like, you know, being constructions, but then having elongated passages of just breaking down as if it's, like, you know, disintegrating or something. The music's just disintegrating, and then somehow reassembles itself later on. Which is almost like maybe how the pop group laid the groundwork for post-rock in a way as well. Because that's like one of the most like admirable elements I've ever found about this band, is they sort of just, there's like, yeah, an osmosis to the way they create music, and it just feels so like indescribable even. You listen to it and you enjoy it. It's a sort of ambience. Maybe even similar to like the best of Brian Eno in that sense. Stuff like that, you know. It's, once again, beyond words. Like the only way I could describe the album itself is like, I wish it was the soundtrack for the new Dune movies, you know. Because there's like these sort of desert elements to it, and then like drone-y sort of extended raga sort of stuff. And yeah, like I just felt that it was really kick-ass, and I was just like, yeah, I'm glad that like an institution band like this, you can tell they're legitimate because they're still making like kind of kick-ass music, and like I was even surprised that it's just so ridiculous. Once again, like I'm glad the music transcends the sort of fan base around this band, because people are saying like, oh, that title, the music it's not political at all. It's like, that's the whole point of post-rock. You propose a question, like the title of this album, and then the music itself you attach your own, you know, imagination to, and it doesn't prescribe something to you, for you, some sort of thematic experience.
Yeah.
You create it yourself.
Yeah. Like, do you want to go to the art world and complain that, like, some of the great conceptual, really interesting avant-garde paintings of the 20th century, which are partly, in some cases, defined by the relationship they have with their title. Do you want to say that that's all shit? Go ahead, but, like, have fun, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, start there, right?
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that, but that's probably even where they're getting it from. Yeah.
The full title, is no title as of 13 February 2024, 28,340 dead. I think I would presume, and from what I've scanned of certain reviews, it seems to be a reference to the essentially genocide going on in the Gaza Strip right now.
Yeah, that's like similar to like as well. I was thinking like such a title like that as well. It probably just comes from, they were just probably hanging out in the studio and they're like, all right, we'll just call it this. Like it just, you know, there's. It's similar to how I described like spontaneous music once, and I forget which album it was in relation to. I think it was I can't remember, one of the, probably that OK Timmers album, I think, and like the Glaxo Babies album. You know, in like free jazz and sort of spontaneous music, there's this idea that you're capturing the moment and emotions and things like that as they're happening, and there's a sort of maybe even like gonzo authenticity to it in the fact that it's visceral because you're capturing as it's happening, right? It's almost the sort of mission statement behind like so-called authentic 90s slacker music, the sort of world that even this band came out of, you know?
Yeah.
A good example of it without like any sort of pruning is like early Sabadoo, where they're just recording at home and just like putting out a tape with minute-long songs they improvise and don't even remember how to play and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
So it's sort of from this sort of world of like indie rock spontaneity, right? And so like a title like that, it's like it's not meant to be like too curated. It's just a thought, like a meditation or something, you know, that happens spontaneously as they're probably coming up with the album, you know?
Yeah.
It's not even meant to mean anything in some sort of, like statement way. It's just cleverly as well, so ingrained in the zeitgeist, like the idea of the current genocide. Like they don't even need to say stuff like that. It's just, you get it, right? You're like, oh wow, like, you know, very evocative. It's subliminal in that sense, you know? And that's a statement enough, I felt, you know? It's weird that, literalism is just so fervent in at the very least, music appreciation in this day and age, but in a lot of things, culture and a lot of things are just caught up in a certain literalism, I feel, you know?
Oh, yeah, sure. I agree. Oh, I guess I'll share my own thoughts on this.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I'm quite familiar with Godspeed You Black Emperor. I know all of the albums fairly well. I know 97 to 2015 quite well, and I've only heard Luciferian Towers from 2017, I think once. No, probably only just once. Same with the 2021 album, Godspeed States End, and as of today, only one listen to No Title as of 13 February 2024. Genocide and Gaza Strip. And of course, the album that came out was originally released in 94 that only got wider people, massive people listening to it in 2018 or something.
Yeah.
I think it's a bit later, maybe. All
2020
lights
or
fucked
something.
on the hairy whatever. Hairy amp drooling, you know. I've heard that once. I guess you could say it's interesting, you know. But, okay, so you can split Godspeed You into 3 different periods, of which we're in... No, 4. Of which we're in the 4th right now. The first period, you could say, is that 94 album and, whatever came before that. Them forming and then up to recording that initial release. I'd call that the first period.
Sure.
I'd call the second period... the 97 to 2002. That's the classic Godspeed You sound as we know it. That's when you think of Godspeed You Black Emperor, it's that particular sound. You take it or you leave it.
Sure.
They thinned out their sound in the 2010s when they came back, and they had a sort of more sparse and it was less sort of abrasive and more but still almost more existentially sort of challenging in a way. And there was it was less about the intensity from all of the prospective abrasion and more about, and this is just pure sonics, I'm not really, the emotional or psychological effects of it. I'm not interested in what precise musical arrangements are being drawn upon in these tracks on these albums. I don't know, I'm not very musically literate really whatsoever actually, but there was more of a very sort of, there's a void to the sound. There's sort of a black hole score going on from 2012 to 2017 on those albums, and I really liked that about them. And I don't think they were quite as popular or well rated, at least the 2015 and 2017. I think I remember in 2015 or 16, Asunder Sweet Never Distress, which I considered as interesting as the other works, was I think considered maybe a bit lesser. But I was like, no, to me this is just as cool as the 2012 album. And I remember liking Luciferian Towers. I remember thinking, yeah, this is very good. I remember why I like this band. I actually would have heard that around the time that Godspeed States End came out, which is interesting. And this is where I realised that there was distinct periods of this band, because Godspeed States End sounded like an attempt to go back to the second period, 97 to 2002, and does a great job of that, and especially within the more modern context and then being older. I'm going to claim that that album's arguably, if I listen to them enough, that one's probably going to be the most effective of them, because I think that's the best distillation of their sound, actually, is that 21 album. Or this new album's take on Period 3.
Yeah. No.
This is closer to the 2010 sound and a more refined sort of... it's been nearly Well, it's definitely been like, it's 9 years since Asunder Sweet and Other Distress, over 10 years since Alleluia, Don't Bend Ascend. So we're approaching like a period of, let's say, reflection toward that period.
Yeah,
which I think,
which is weird to think about.
Which I think, obviously it's a greater distance of time than God's P was to, say, what Yang Kuei UXO in 2002 was. But it's still like a 10 year period. 10 years is quite a bit of time, right? Which is reflect where you almost feel like you were something of a different person 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You're like observing this behavior that someone else committed to,
Yeah.
And,
I was reading an article the other week where that's how, like, the guy from The Apartments described his albums.
Oh, fascinating.
I always find it fascinating when artists like that, or like, Godspeed You, I think that's the key to, like, creativity as you age. Like, you're able to look back at what you did before and, like, you see another person in it, and that's reflective that you've grown, which, it seems key to this sort of group as well. It's interesting you bring that up.
Like, that's what I seem to notice about the development of their sonics over the years. And there's a case to be made that these are the two most interesting albums, the 2020 releases that they've actually put out, from my perspective. Obviously, like, some of the brazen creative craziness and intensity of Lift Your Skinny Fists, like, some of that stuff's totally worth the hype. I've felt for quite a while now.
Sure,
I have no problem with that being as adulated as it is, and it is very adulated at 4.24.
Jesus.
Like, I mean, wow. I mean, maybe not that high, but like...
Especially for an album that long as well.
Yeah, when I first listened to it, I was like, I don't really know if I get this. When I was like around 19 or 20, I was like, no, I really like... I just like that it kind of went there, and I just like... open your mind to like it was still like a valid structure of like it existed in a sense that, like, something like a little bit like Daydream or the Sonic Youth albums still fit into these weird, but like they were very informal albums in a respect, but they still had a certain grace and like artistic conviction about them where like they fit into that artistic mold, but because they did it more subtly and sort of organically and with less contrivance, they were like almost better at it. It's like something like Daydream Nation felt less hackneyed than a Physical Graffiti or the Who rock operas or Blonde on Blonde or crap like that,
Yeah.
Well, not that that's all crap. Blonde on Blonde is crap in my own opinion, but
I
appreciate the rock operas and Physical Graffiti.
I get what you mean, though.
They're closer to the White Album, double album, which is, very organic and just there, It's not... There's nothing contrived about the White Album. That's like that's everyone's problem with it, that there's no contrivances to it.
Yeah, except for maybe Obla Di Obla Da.
But even that's just like a whack, weird decision within the context of this. You know what I mean?
That's true.
It's like it's just like such a just spontaneous, like
doing like a ska song.
Not like no second thought. Just like put it on there. No one thought twice about it. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's just like such a like just a kind of a snarky thing to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, that's true.
But no, I'm still a big fan of this band, and my appreciation for them has really reaffirmed itself. Actually, the problem is with this band is it's not their fault. Yeah. I don't feel like listening to this music all that much. When I was like 20, going on 21, it was, and I had a lot of like I had nothing to do. I just listened to albums in my parents' sort of quasi basement thing. Like, this sort of music was great to listen to as I just browsed the web, smoked cannabis, and went in and outside, pet cats, all of that. But when I'm, like, coming to and from work, and even when I was working while I still lived with my parents, you come back and you just want to chill out. Like, it never occurred to me to listen to this music afterwards. So, like, and I've come to appreciate stuff like... the more electronic variants of this sort of stuff, like very depressing sort of dour mood music, like Atom East. We discussed Sun Reacher on the second Mandala. Like, when I listened to Sun Reacher on acid, that was like so gripping. Like that drone, like gripping on acid. Like it was maybe hard to believe. It's only 40 minutes, so it doesn't even take up too much of your time. But like it's one of those things. It was just like as I was like browsing the web, doing whatever, or like just chilling out, relaxing. It was just grand,
Nice.
And whereas I don't think Godspeed You would work on acid, because it's not, because electronic music lends itself to that sort of state more so, whereas this is more jagged and sort of just horrifying. A bit like, I couldn't listen to Audrey on acid, for instance, but Audrey's so full of like sonic washings and like sort of these big sort of shoegaze, but also post-rock, like in the slowcore Red House Painters sense sound, but it brings the emotion to Audrey really makes it gripping. Maybe sometimes, or at least sooner I'd listen to that than Godspeed You, whether I think it's superior or not is kind of irrelevant.
Oh, that's sort of true, man. You wouldn't think things like slowcore or like Audrey and stuff like that would work tripping. The one time when I was tripping, like the sun had just gone down and I was like sitting on a golf course in like tropical Queensland, and the stars were just coming out, and the song Roller Coaster on the Roller Coaster Red House Painters album came on, and it's like I was just like, this is just like beautiful. It was just like sublimity, like expressed through music.
Not of that era, Kozilek, but when we heard Benji on Acid, that was one of the great music moments of like the last of the. That was during that was in 2020. So of the 2020s thus far for me.
That song on Trippin's good as well.
Very beautiful. Yeah.
The Ben's My Friend song.
Yeah.
But yeah, sometimes like this music, it just depends on mood. Like you said, it's not for all the time. It's for like spontaneity. You know, it's just like the sort of thing that you feel in the mood to listen to a band like Tortoise or Godspeed You, or in my case like Psychic TV or like, you know, something like Milk from Cheltenham.
I listen to that a lot. I can always get back to that.
All this sort of stuff, you know, it suits a certain like mood, you know. It's not like you said music you listen to and from your way to work. Or
I could like that avant prog sort of stuff. I can, believe it or not, because it's unpredictable, crazy, and almost there's a punk intensity to something like Milk from Cheltenham.
Yeah,
and it's so like I'm always like focusing on everything going on. I'm just captivated by everything happening. Milk from Cheltenham, all the decisions being made, all the just the frenetic spontaneity of it all. Same with like Henry Cow and Rock and Opposition in general. Maybe some of the crazy stuff like Art Zoid, who I haven't listened to in a while, kind of go to.
Yeah, I guess that's a bit more frenetic than say something like Godspeed You. That's true. Or like drone music in general. Drone music is a bit more sort of indicative of indoors. That album you mentioned before, the drone one.
Sunreacher, Adam.
I listened to that whilst walking around at work, and that was uniquely good. But that's just because that was a fucking great album.
It is really strong. He's great. Yeah, he's got new stuff out, which I need to become more familiar with. Actually, Vive la France, I guess. Still, another young guy. He's born in 2000. I'm very impressed. But anyway, I was speaking of I assume very young people and people from the non-English speaking world, though there are English language songs on this album, along with songs in Portuguese, because this is a band not from the American Midwest. These guys are from Brazil. This is Wikipedia. Currently based in Rio de Janeiro, but it doesn't say where they were formed as such in Brazil. Oh, sorry, excuse me, my major mistake. This is an individual artist whose real name doesn't say here, but he's also known as Alpha Dream 2, Delta Bay, Delta Bomber, and D2LTA. He could be rather young as far as I know. This is actually their fourth album. There was a self-titled in 2019 that was released in 2020 called Die, and a 2022 release called Chronic, and For the Rest of Your Life in 2024. Can't say I'm familiar with the earlier albums as of yet, but I probably would like to check them out at some point. But why I wanted to bring this one up is because I guess historically I wasn't into this sort of style of music. Like I didn't like American football or the bands that were homaging it in the 2010s. I thought they were boring, banal, privileged, and sort of like lacked immense self-awareness. And so basically when I heard this, I felt how I felt basically when I listened to I do like the sort of slowcore sound, but when the Spanish guys in Viva Belgrado, I think that's their name, I also really got to remember, but that album I promoted on Mandala, the Spanish slowcore / post-hardcore album, that was a good one. It's amazing how even when I have no idea what the lyrics are, like no words are kind of hooking me as their Kozilek's words would, like 24 or I'm a Rock and that's a color, but you know, like
sure.
Really kind of grippy with the words that you know. But Viva Belgrado, I realised the structure and the musical qualities themselves are utterly gripping. I heard that one on Acid too, actually, and it was mesmerising.
Yeah, nice.
And so, like, basically it's like you don't even need sort of a localised, sort of familiar context. You can just appreciate it as music. And if these guys from Brazil can find resonance in this music from the Midwest, not because it emotionally resonates for them. I mean, maybe it does, and people from Brazil, from what I understand, do have, especially nowadays, a fairly good understanding of English for what it's worth, due to the proximity to North America.
Yeah, and the internet. And
prominence of American media and all.
Yeah, and that Midwest scene, like I said, went international.
Yeah,
in a weird way. Which, ended up with stuff like this, funnily enough.
So it really resonated with them, and they've just created a sequence of really gripping, engaging, listenable tracks, and just as a sequence of songs to listen to while you're doing your thing. You just like find yourself like really uplifted by the music you listen to. It's just good, emotional, sincere, guitar-based compositions
with tasteful production choices.
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Like that's what I was gonna say in conjunction with like the Tiger's Jaw second album.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just wish those bands from the Midwest that clearly inspired this stuff, like Foxing sort of did more recently, just had more tasteful production stylings. There's a lot wrong with the mid to late 2000s like power pop, like alternative rock.
Oh yeah.
Production choices. They just made the worst choices possible for rock music and kind of killed it in a way.
Yeah, it's probably.
Whereas this just feels a bit more. It feels like a very creatively almost like high production, say, garage or like home job recording. Yeah, and just very tasteful touches of like little arty sensibilities covered in I guess noise, right?
Yeah.
And sort of weird dissonant choices and things like that, little glitchy moments, like a bunch of very tasteful stuff, and like a sort of hyper nasally melodic vocal style that somehow is treated with an effect that makes it work well, and is able to sort of the first track is evocative of in that sort of sentimentality. In the sort of twee sense, that the best of the Field Mice or my earlier pick, Half String.
Oh yeah,
that sort of sensibility is able to with that nasally thing sort of work like I said in a tasteful way that actually enhances the production, enhances that sort of generally distasteful style. It was very prominent in Midwest emo and happy core, but it goes all the way back to alternative rock, Oasis, the hyper nasally vocals in that, for example. It sort of starts with that, where old rock took that from I guess John Lydon,
Absolutely,
because prior to John Lydon there weren't very many nasally vocalists,
Peter Hamill, perhaps one.
Yeah, maybe a few. But
that's the alleged inspiration for John Lydon. Some people like to joke.
Yeah,
maybe I think it's kind of a serious claim. Some people say.
No, apparently John Lydon was a fan, and he's sort of doing a nasally troubadour sort of thing, like an old bardish sort of thing, a sort of rural folkish style. Which actually that was the nasal style was in that sort of English folk music. At least, I've heard a Gordon Giltrap album from the late 60s where he does that, and he's sort of in that folk revival world.
Yeah.
Though most of them did do sort of traditional singing. It's interesting. I guess it depends on your ruralism. But yeah, no, this album was pretty kick-ass. Definitely that first song as well. That was a very well made alternative rock pop song, a kind of a classic, instant classic in a sense. Yeah, definitely. Well, little made short 3-minute song, sort of the best of what alt rock can do. I'm glad people are still making good alt rock in a way.
Yeah, I think it's just inevitable because maybe we're in the last wave of it, and maybe the generation under Z is going to not give a stuff. But it's possible actually. But I think in this kind of final throw of it, it's people love the sort of that sort of economic, the resistance to economic desperation and sort of potential nihilism, which began the thought of the gigging circuit of the 80s, potentially, bands like Husker Du, and that you mentioned them, they're all described in that book, This Band Can Change Your Life, for example.
Oh, Our Band Will Be Your Life, yeah.
Yeah, that whole world, that's sort of what people now who are not from that generation, from subsequent generations, looking back on that as not necessarily, maybe a little bit as an Arcadia, but also was like a very relevant situation to their own. And that's why there was like gigging circuit sort of continued through the 90s. I mean, of course it would in the 90s because Nirvana was so popular, so everyone was sort of, even more people wanted to be in those sort of bands, than in the 80s.
Yeah.
And then the 2000s sort of continued in its own way, but I think a lot more bands had more commercial aspirations because the bands they were inspired by were some of the commercial bands of the 90s, like the pop punk groups or emo groups in the 2000s. So that affected a lot of gigging circuits, I imagine, it seems, over the course of the 2000s and 2010s in the English-speaking world or Western world generally, or perhaps just parts of the world in the East. Japan has their own scenes, and Korea, blah, 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 whatever. Well, whatever, I don't know, as well, as it were, as of now at least. But, yeah, and then so I think, but with the internet being a thing and, music history just being available to everyone, bands rock up who are like, wait a minute, like, why are there so many shit bands around? Like, we couldn't have inspiration from good bands and make kind of good new music. And so you have bands that you actually, if you were around them, you'd love to be able to see things like Space, to have that fantastic 15-minute sort of hardcore punk release from this year. You'd love to be able to see Omni from, I said they were from Athens, Georgia, when we discussed for Souvenir, their fourth album, on the second Mandala episode, but they're from Atlanta, just...
okay. It's still Georgia.
Yeah, still Georgia. Like, seeing them would be fantastic. Seeing the Hears Collective would be phenomenal. Foxing, Squid over from the UK. There's been a few like sort of punk and like old adjacent acts from like the 2020s, very current acts. Even like Brian Jonestown Massacre album, I've listened to like that 4 times recently.
Yeah, but if you wanted to see them in Sydney, that you would have seen them having a fight.
Brian Jonestown Massacre.
Yeah, that happened.
When was this?
They toured like last year, or maybe earlier this year.
Mm-hmm.
And they like started fighting each other.
Oh shit! A bit like that other band recently.
Which one?
Oh, what was it?
Jane's Addiction?
Yeah.
I heard something about that. Was that in Sydney? Maybe
not in Sydney. It was in America, I think.
Yeah, because Brian Jonestown, I think it was in Sydney. I swear they started fighting each other on stage.
What's his name? Andrew Newcomb and someone else.
It was on the news, unless I'm confusing them with another band. But
it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. I mean, Newcomb's known to be like has conflicts with his bandmates.
Yeah, I swear that happened like earlier this year.
Other bands.
Yeah, I got them in the news.
Sort of similar. I don't know that, but I don't. Well, I'm only really a fan of that album, but I've wanted to get into the 90s ones lately, and I need to make time for that because, just homaging Brian Jones era Rolling Stones, like there's nothing wrong with that at all, I think.
Yeah, well, and also,
Oh, the Jim Jones, yeah. Well, that's a bit less pleasant, but still kind of like I like the clever, sick humour of it. I can't deny that.
Very Gen X.
Just very deliciously so, even, and likably so. But that's why those bands, those scenes still like flourish, at least creatively. Maybe they're not as prominent as they used to be. Certainly in Sydney, it seems mostly dead. Apparently Canberra is sort of kicking in a respect. But I was going to
Canberra always have something going on because there's nothing to do there.
Yeah, since Canberra's still outside, believe me.
Yeah,
they have no choice. Like they've got the internet too, but they're just like. Because in Sydney, it's like you live in like a holiday destination, so you're like, I don't feel like going outside. Like, there's too many people out there. But Canberra's like, yeah, fuck it, let's go outside. It's just nothing, it's just like nice parks and no one's there. When especially in school holidays, there's no excursions because otherwise there's excursions in Canberra all the time.
Well, Sydney's weird. The CBD is definitely a tourist trap. But all of the suburbs is just one giant, like, experimental suburban monstrosity.
Yeah,
It just sprawls forever.
You know what I'm going to say? Sydney on a weeknight, like the most busy parts near Town Hall, like just going through all those areas near the George Street, like it is so metropolitan in a quasi, I don't know if there's any implications here. I don't mean any implications here if people read into this, but like, in the sense of how people describe like Tokyo and Hong Kong and Taipei,
I get it.
Or like London now, even there's no implications there, thanks guys. Or Berlin, like you go through parts of Sydney and just like, damn, this is modernity. This is actually kind of slick. Maybe it's superficial, but like for at least a short term, for at least a temporary moment, I'm like, this is nice. This is like Chris Doyle film. This is cool.
It is definitely.
And it fades inevitably.
Well, I get exactly what you mean.
This is all just restaurants and food and shit.
But it's also less people.
And lights. Well, that's it.
Could you imagine
on a weeknight? I specifically said on a weeknight. Yeah.
But even on the weekend, like, could you imagine what you just described? But in like Tokyo or New York,
they packed like sardines, right?
Packed, yeah. Whereas Sydney at least isn't quite that, fortunately enough.
Mm-hmm.
I get what you mean by the implications too. That's hilarious.
Yeah, I just because I know like people who could jump on that, and if I did, and if that was an implication, then feel free to jump on me about that. By the way, but I realized when I was saying it, like, oh, that could have some horrible implications, and I want to kind of like shut that down as soon as possible because I do think those implications would be quite disgusting, frankly.
No, it ain't Burwood.
Oh God.
Effing.
Oh, it's all down the drain. Christ Almighty.
Nah, I'm a fan of Villawood.
No, I'm too. I've got no beef with it. I think it's fantastic.
What's the other one near Villawood that was the Vietnamese one?
Not
Cabramatta.
Yeah.
Yeah. Man, Sydney is like Vietnamese refugee era is like the coolest era.
It's good stuff. I've got a great rich
Well,
history.
it's interesting. I was thinking about this recently because, like, I might have even mentioned it. Like, I work around an area that's full of just like affluent British expats and stuff, and I'm like, I love how in affluent, like, upper middle class to upper class suburbs, expat communities are referred to as expat communities, but out west in the like working class suburbs, like if there's an ethnic group, it's called an enclave. So it's like,
sick.
I'm like, why aren't the British people? Why are they called expats? Shouldn't it be a British enclave?
I guess it's implied that like they moved here for quasi holiday reasons. You know, they were doing well in Britain, but they're just like, fuck it, like let's just party on the beach for a while.
Yeah.
As opposed to like someone who, even if you were living like say a middle class life in a part of the world, it might still been fairly unpleasant or very unpleasant compared to a middle class life in Australia. So you're just like, I want a better future for my kids. Let's just go to Sydney or Adelaide or Brisbane or wherever the heck. Canberra, why not?
Well, they're fleeing the English sinking ship, and they're pricing out the
British are, yeah.
the local Australians.
Oh, England's great. Oh, the soccer team's great. Oh, Manchester's great. Oh, Scotland's great. Go back! Go back if it's so great. I said that on this show from the day.
Well, I agree. There should be like a current affairs story about the English upper class immigrants who are pricing out the like working class Australians who have lived in the eastern suburbs for however long. And
yeah, somehow there are actual working class people in the eastern suburbs, as it turns out,
and they're being gentrified out of it very slowly. They're pretty much all gone now, and well, you only get stories about like Western Sydney where none of these people live being like hostile, and it's like the most hostile place I can think of is there.
Oh yeah, and not to say that there wouldn't be hostility in some parts, like a needless sort of like unnecessary like anti-intellectual bend to like some parts of Western Sydney. I feel like it's sort of, well, one, it's enforced by like those, to some extent at least, by those ruling classes who kind of get off on those people like not having access or motivation to be as educated as some other more privileged types are. And like privileged people like don't make any use of their education for the most part anyway. So like it's not even like they squander that, but they don't even use it.
They don't have the same desperation, and like I think what
very true.
The people you're describing,
much worth mentioning.
They're completely driven by an economy of desperation.
Yes.
That's what causes them to make rash decisions. And
that's worth mentioning first.
It's all out of like desperation, out of a sort of like predicament that's been thrust upon them for the most part. Like. Very rarely, like, people, like, who actually in positions of, like, socio-economic power, when they, like, sort of stumble in a legitimate way, they're not held to the fire the way just, like, a regular person is, It's kind of crazy in that sense.
Not logistically, yeah.
Except like maybe celebrities, but like celebrities are put in the public sphere.
That sort of shunning is kind of super. It's sort of immediate. Like take like Gladys Berejiklian, like the media, like who've been. Well, the media is still sort of like covered for her hard, to be fair. Part depending on where your source was, I suppose. The ABC maybe not so much, which is for the better, I would say. But like she's still got like. Like something to fall back on. She's had like a fairly long career, and being it pays okay. Like she'll be fine. She's got friends in like high-ish places. I'm sure she didn't piss everyone off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like someone will give her like a little job somewhere. I imagine.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
there's a million safety nets. Like, say you're a homeless person who like got laid off by a disability care working institution that's publicly funded. Because the government decides to restructure it because of political pressure. And so they restructure it in a terrible way. and like you happen to work in this public institution, but you're homeless as well, and then so the Centrelink, the dole company, can have like a clerical error that just gets rid of your payment, all because of a computer fault.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like there's no
very Gilliam's Brazil.
Yeah, it's very dystopian, and it's like there's no safety net for that person, and that person is the majority. That's not like a politician or someone who has like a million safety nets.
Yeah, yeah.
And so it's just weird that there's that sort of predicament where, depending on like socioeconomic status, you're either an expat or an enclave. You know?
Yeah, because it's not like the people in that lowest bracket, they're not asking for much. They're not even asking for enough that it would affect the upper 1%. I'm talking more in this country's context, but this would apply everywhere, I would sadly imagine.
Yeah.
There is like what is being asked for from the lower socioeconomic brackets would sincerely, it would not impact the lifestyles of the uber rich. Like, it sincerely would not. Like let's just play devil's advocate for a moment. Like, you actually wouldn't need to cut in on their selfish garbage all that much, I don't think, to help out the bottom brackets of society. It's just. But the thing is, it's like the things that like this money gets like wasted on, like these like elaborate vehicles and big like housing renovations and you know, private tennis courts and just bullshit that they don't end up using or enjoying for longer than like a few months seemingly. And it's just and the argument they use is like, oh, but we employ people. Well, you give people an option to, like, you know, I'll pay you if I think the job's done well enough, and you treat them like subhumans. Like that's what you're offering them, as opposed to like an opportunity to help out, you know, give the government, like, you know, like just a slight bit. I know the government will probably not do much good with the money either, but like, or even like, fuck the government, like, you know, find some intermediary organization, go to one of these like homeless shelters and sort of like, you know, beef them up a little bit. Like, it's literally going to be of no loss to anyone who lives in like the 5 or 10 richest Sydney suburbs. Like,
maybe the church could gain legitimacy by like weeding out corruption in governments. Wouldn't that be an ironic twist?
Oh, the church doesn't have that much power in Australia at this point to do something like that.
That's probably true.
And when it did, it was part of the sort of the power. The problem. And that's how you kind of, unfortunately, that's how you kind of moved up in the church. If you're a member of the church and you sort of say, hey, I think there's corruption going on, it's like, okay, we're going to relocate you to this little town in Northern Territory. How about that?
Yeah.
And like and as a pious Christian Catholic, you'd be like, oh yeah, of course, I'll do that. Well, and like, wait a minute, shit.
It's unlikely.
They just hit me.
It would be an ironic twist if they were able to see that.
That wouldn't surprise me, to be honest. Like, we are at a place where, for instance, like a lot of the a lot of the humanitarian aid that gets sent worldwide now, and in a manner that is sort of seemingly uncorrupted and not filtered through like a lot of sometimes wicked UN even sponsored sort of scandalous activity. It's strangely enough the church, who's like sort of humanitarian sort of aid deliverers, are like very, very sincere and like are actually doing a lot of help right now, because they're not motivated by money, they're motivated by faith. They're not even motivated by a massive need of funds. Like, the UN's got to pay all their people who do what they do, whereas the church, it's a lot of very sincere and devout volunteers. And I think that's the power of the church as one of these organizations.
I agree. In my mind, as someone who was like raised secular, funnily enough, another person who is as well as secular, but like eventually at one point worked for like churches in their charity capacity for ages. Well, he once said to me that that's like the best part about the church, and I do agree in its modern capacity. The sort of impartiality to the charity that a church organization can give is probably the best aspect of it in the contemporary sense. And like I said, that's probably the best way it could utilize itself in the modern setting, be a apolitical, like morally driven, you know, vessel of charity and stuff like that, you know. A sort of bureaucracy of faith or something, a humanitarian bureaucracy rather than like a vessel of power or something like that. It could exist as opposed to power.
Yeah, it was money being funneled, and like, you know, it's like all these people who are at the top of the UN, like of the old Catholic Church, like getting fairly cushy positions in society, or from rather cushy positions in society, and it's just like, what are you guys trying to do here? You're trying to, like, you know, it's like, oh, we want to do this and this and this, but, you know, we need this and that, and it's like blah 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 blah. It's like, why can't you just like get stuff done? Like, just like sell off one of your fucking homes and like fund this like this NGO to fucking get aid to one of these nations. You know what I mean? Like, just forget the logistics. Like, you know how like when if you see like a fire down the road, and like the chances are like you don't really think about the logistics. You sort of like just like call the fire brigade. But what you also do is a lot of people would run up toward the house, and if possible, they would like try to like call and see if anyone was in there. They wouldn't think about the logistics of, oh, should I like be so close to that, or oh, is this gonna, or even like if like you pulled over, if you were driving and you like pulled over to where you saw like a building on fire, like you wouldn't think like, oh my god, you'd be like, oh fuck, like is there anyone in there? Like hey, and you like call the police, like, hey, you'd look at the street name, you like, you know what I mean? Like, you would actively get involved, and you wouldn't think about like it's just one of those things where like, and you actually don't have much power in that situation. Like, you could go into the building at the cost of your own life, but like, you know, you wouldn't even be expected to do that. Like, you just, you know what I mean? Like, it's just one of those things where
but instinctively you would like rush to it.
But whereas like if you have all the resources to do something about it, and you're not, because it's like, oh, these very rich people who can be pretty grumpy with me. It's just like, are you fearing being hit or something? Just say it. We'll storm their mansions if we have to. Like, fucking, I don't care. Like, what's going to happen? Like, what, they're going to shoot us? Then we're dead. They've got nothing to lose. We have nothing to lose.
Storm the mansions.
That's what it feels like. I mean, listen, guys, we'll give you notice. You can vacate the premises before we arrive. And listen, here's the other thing. It only needs to be one day for us to do that. And you need to be worried every day that it will be that day. But we only need to plan for that one day. You need to be worried every day. And on that note, I think we'll close it here, unless there's something else to share about Wikipedia.
Well, yeah, no, that is the pathology of that, definitely. And yeah, the Wikipedia thing, yeah, check it out. The missiles launcher.
Very good stuff, yeah. Thanks, everyone. That's Mandala for this week.